Number 5. The Warner Brothers Jungle Habitat. Originally opening on July 19th of 1972, this park closed its doors by 1976, which is a really bad timeline for a theme park that was technically never completed. The first time Jungle Habitat made headlines was only months after it first opened for business, when an Israeli tourist named Abraham Levy was riding through the safari in a taxi cab and decided to roll down the window to get a better look at some of the animals roaming about. 2 lions attacked the car and mauled the 26-year-old tourist, causing lacerations to his face and shoulder. He took credit for the harm, citing his own foolishness, which helped to dodge a media onslaught. Well, for the most part. By the end of the year, reports of animals escaping into the wilds of West Milford were far too many in volume to be ignored. Besides sightings of harmless animals like peacocks, there were rumors spreading about dangerous animals such as a pack of wolves and a lion being sighted along local roads. These sentiments, voiced 28 years ago, are identical to the rumors still running rampant today. Yep, you heard me, today. Tales told by West Milford residents who have looked out in their backyards include wandering ostriches and a band of baboons running amok in the town's pharmacy. Emus, baboons, and even wolves are just some of the uncaged critters which were known to have escaped the park. I feel like I found the origins for the Night at the Museum franchise. On July 8th of 1974, a 68-year-old visitor from Long Island was grabbed by the trunk of a baby elephant, which then slammed her against a fence and bit her. The woman, Elizabeth Ennis, was later awarded $200,000 by a court. In an account in the New York Times, she claimed the elephant bit her on her right hand, and because of the trauma incurred by being slammed into the fence, she had persistent pain in her right side that prevented her from lifting heavy items. Her husband was awarded $5,000 for loss of companionship. So the animals at the park also had a tendency to damage the cars that passed through. An e-museum for the park says that tigers like to bite and pop car tires, and monkeys like to rip antennas off of cars. Sounds like a lack of good animal training and boundaries to me. So right after the park closed in 1976, some animal carcasses were left outside. This pile grew until 30 animal bodies, including that of an elephant, a bison, a camel, some zebras, were all left lying until April, when the ground had thawed enough to finally bury what was left of the bodies. The 6 months that they were left exposed was a violation of state laws, which stated that any animal should be buried within 48 hours of its death. Despite this violation, Warner Brothers was not sanctioned. Jungle Habitat is gone now, but not forgotten. Reports of mysterious kangaroo sightings in remote corners of West Milford still turn up from time to time. Number 4. Under the Sea Gone Wrong. Disney's River Country was the first water park at Walt Disney World, and possibly the first themed water park ever. Look, as much as I love Disney World, and I'm mentally planning my next trip back, I'm here to call a spade a spade. Some consider River Country to be the first water park anywhere, but that depends on how you define a water park. Yes, River Country opened almost a year before Wet n Wild in Orlando, but there were public pools and lake parks with water slides and other aquatic play equipment long before River Country opened. So just as Disneyland had reinvented the amusement park 21 years earlier, River Country reinvented aquatic recreation. The water park's grand opening was on June 20th of 1976, and on Thursday, August 28th of 1980, a sad Associated Press story appeared in newspapers throughout North America. It was reported that a rare but deadly disease caused by an amoeba found in Florida freshwater lakes had claimed its 4th victim, a New York youngster who had spent his vacation swimming at River Country. The disease, amoebic meningoencephalitis, attacked the nervous system and brain. You don't want to know how many tries it took me to say that. The youngster died after the amoeba entered his nose, went through the nasal passage, and attacked the nervous system, including the brain. Investigators from the U.S. Center for Disease Control in Atlanta and the New York Health Department pinpointed River Country as the source of the amoeba, after the parents reported that the amusement park was the only place where he went swimming. So photos and maps of River Country show that the park had 2 bodies of water. The smaller one was a clean, clear swimming pool. The larger one appeared to be a natural cove, completely open to Bay Lake, which is the largest natural lake at Walt Disney World. At some point in the 1990s, Walt Disney World banned swimming in its lake. The 1995 map of Walt Disney World still included the resort's beaches under the swimming section, whereas the 2000 edition made it clear that the beaches were strictly for sunbathing. But River Country stayed open. There was never another death from amoebic, very long word that I'm not going to try and say again, linked to River Country. But there were 2 drownings, one in 1982 and the other in 1989. So River Country had its normal seasonal closing at the end of the 2001 season, but when the time came for it to reopen for the 2002 season, it didn't. River Country never reopened. Number 3, a hiking adventure gone wrong. So this tale comes along courtesy of Grant Charbonneau, who along with his buddy Mike embarked on a hiking adventure on the day after he turned 18. So armed with a compass to navigate the labyrinth of trails, the duo set out to conquer the longest route leading to a camping spot deep within the forest. The color-coded paths ensured they stayed on course, but fate had other plans for the friends. As they ventured along the red route adorned with a tent emblem, a dilapidated sign hinted at an old dirt road, tempting them to deviate from their original plan. Intrigued by the mystery it promised, they forged ahead, discovering an abandoned place concealed by nature's, reclaiming of it. A desolate structure covered in graffiti and bearing ominous signs of warning. Let's just see, what did it have? Oh right, the classic, keep out, private property, and trespassers will be, kaboomed, for lack of a better word. Undeterred by the foreboding messages, the boys breached the door's defenses, revealing a time-forgotten interior frozen in the mid-1980s. Dust-covered relics, wild boar, and stag heads adorning the walls painted a picture of abandonment and eerie stillness. Now their curiosity pushed them further. Mike ascended upstairs while Grant explored the kitchen. The disconcerting ambiance heightened as they stumbled upon a locked door beneath the stairs. Now, this is where I personally would be running for the hills, because if something is locked, it should probably stay that way, but I'm sure you and I can both guess how this story is about to go, otherwise I wouldn't be mentioning it. Determined, the boys broke the chains and uncovered a hidden staircase leading to a basement. And not just any basement, one harboring a bizarre secret. So their flashlights illuminated a room filled with glass cases, each veiled in layers of dust. As they wiped away the grime, they were met with grotesque wax-like figures clad in various dresses. Now finally, we've got a chill running down their spines, but oh, just wait till we get to the center case. There, suspended in eternal bondage, was a clothed human figure, a haunting display of the macabre. A yellow-stained envelope nearby contained a handwritten note, revealing the twisted mind behind this morbid collection. The author, a self-proclaimed collector, detailed a dark journey from taxidermist to a connoisseur of preserved human beauty. His words, not mine. Each victim, immortalized in wax, became a macabre masterpiece in this gruesome gallery. Overwhelmed by revulsion, the boys finally made their escape, leaving the forest and its secrets behind. The note, a testament to the deranged mind that lurked in the shadows, became their only link to a truth that the authorities struggled to unravel. Now, as the guys sat in the safety of Grant's car, the weight of what they witnessed began to sink in. So this forest, once a realm of adventure, kinda now bore the stain of unspeakable horrors. And the abandoned house stood as a silent witness to the awfulness within. Sorry, I was losing my words there because, how on earth do you describe that? The echoes of that day linger in the, depths of their memories. A chilling reminder that, maybe don't adventure where you're not supposed to go. Seriously, folks, beware! Number 2, captive room. Did you seriously think I was gonna do a whole list on abandoned places that would terrify authorities without having a single story from actual authorities? Come on, folks. Who do you take me for? I like my credible sources, and this one just happens to hit a little close to home. Oh, how close, you ask? Well, as an Ontario resident, a story that took place in Pickering seems pretty close enough. So back in 2011, on, December 19th to be exact, Durham police reported that they'd found what appeared to be a confinement room in an old abandoned farmhouse east of Toronto. Police said the room in the Northwest Pickering home was recently built and looked like it was solely designed to hold someone captive. Now, investigators at the time were trying to figure out if the room was used to actually confine somebody or if it was just designed for another purpose and they were, over-exaggerating. So they mentioned one possibility is that it might have been built as a prop for an amateur filmmaker. So this room was stumbled upon by contractors surveying the property because, it was slated for demolition more than 2 weeks prior to the report. At the time, Durham police spokesman Dave Selby said that the home had been abandoned for so long that the focus wasn't on the original owners, but on anyone who may have been seen driving in the area or any other suspicious activity. They're obviously down there because it's somewhere where no one would check. You could stick someone in this room and lock them in. Now, police didn't rule anything out, but they weren't able to determine at the time if anybody was ever held in the room. Once again, we've got our cop spokesman. Our forensic guys went down and took all kinds of samples of anything they could, find to figure out if it was used and how it was used. But at this point, it's still under investigation, and we really don't know if it was used for a criminal purpose or not. So 2 weeks after the room was discovered, the farmhouse burned down in what police described as a suspicious fire. Now, they've never laid charges in connection to the fire, but, Robert White was eventually charged, arrested, and pleaded guilty to breaking and entering with intent. He planned on kidnapping a woman named Gwen Armstrong, a friend of his ex-wives, because she provided his ex-wife with emotional and financial support after their separation. Yikes! Number 1, somebody found a body. A group of young adults in South Carolina back in 2021 got quite the scare when they were exploring an allegedly haunted house and wound up discovering a dead body in a freezer. According to a local media report, the strange incident occurred in the town of Norway as 8 youngsters were riding ATVs in a remote part of the community. So at some point in the midst of their adventure, they came upon an abandoned shack, which is rumored to be, haunted. And as adventurous folks are, likely to do, they were like, hey, let's go see if there's any ghosts inside. However, as they were looking around the vacant residence, one of the members of the group stumbled upon a sizable freezer and decided, let's see what's inside. inside. Upon opening the cold storage unit, he was greeted by an ungodly smell, which he initially thought was just, rotting meat. Like, technically he was right, although the contents of the freezer were far more gruesome than, some old pork chops. That's because on closer examination, he realized that the meat was wearing jeans and socks. So the would-be ghost hunters called the cops, who arrived on the scene to collect the body for an autopsy to figure out the identity of the deceased. It is believed that the body inside the freezer had been there for months and could possibly be the victim of foul play. As for the adventurous youngins, it would seem that they are now haunted by something far more unsettling than a ghost, the stench from the rotting corpse. One of them said, "I heard that once you smell a human, you can't ever forget it." And he's like, "Yeah, I can still smell it right now."
Number 5. The John Zapis Museum. For someone like John Zapis, opening a haunted museum was always in the cards. It was practically destiny. Few people can claim to come from a legacy of haunted museums, but Zapis can, since he's the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, America's most famous and oftentimes controversial demonologists. Growing up with a large fondness for his aunt and uncle's work, Zapis developed a love of the paranormal from an early age and saw fit to try and carry on his relatives' work after their passing, opening his own collection of haunted relics the same way that the Warrens did. And what a collection of weird relics Zapis has picked up. I'll shout out a couple of the cooler ones. The highlight for me has got to be this sword that was used to conjure black magic, and the sword is in like all of the promotional imagery, so it's gotta be pretty good. Check out this photo of Zapis where he looks like a dark wizard who's also a fantasy author. Among the blade are things like a cast iron skull that was used in occult rituals, plenty of haunted dolls and idols, an ornate elk skull thought to be used in something evil, and loads more. Zapis does point out on the website, in the frequently asked questions section, not to worry too much about being exposed to this stuff, as everything that's brought into the collection is blessed before taking residence. Although they do make a small warning on the website that there is a teeny tiny small chance that any residual evil might attach to you in the museum. So, I don't know, make sure to wash your hands with hand sanitizer or holy water on the way out. I can't not include this, by the way, but the website also states that if Zapis believes personally that any of the items in the museum have become too evil or too haunted to remain safe for public display, he throws it into an unspecified body of water. So if you're looking to start a collection of slightly used haunted relics on the cheap, I'd just check out the surrounding bodies of water to the museum. Now unfortunately, John Zapis' museum is currently closed. Hey, this list was about ones that had to be abandoned, right? Can't come as too much of a surprise. But for those who are hoping to get a good up-close personal look at these cursed relics, Zapis says he's been searching for a new location for the collection. Hopefully somewhere with some good ventilation, really let all that evil air flow. And hey, if you're looking for more videos about haunted museums, haunted objects, haunted dolls, haunted everything really, we've got all more of that in spades. So stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary, keep the screams coming all night long. Let's keep going. Number 4. The Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. Pack up the whole family and make sure to stop by at the gift shop for the Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. Don't worry, there's something for everybody here to enjoy. Make sure you take home the miniature guillotine. One quick look at their website is particularly illuminating. Our main product is emotion, boldly proclaimed as their slogan. Yeah, well, agonizing pain is definitely an emotion, so I can't disagree there. The Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments really is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a massive collection of real historical relics and replicas serving to highlight some of the most disgustingly creative works of engineering ever invented. The kind of stuff that would make Jigsaw and his funny little puppet blush with anticipation. The museum's goal is to remind us just how truly unimaginably cruel human beings are capable of being to each other, and the lengths to which we will go to attain such horrid ambitions. The phrase, "those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it," comes up a whole lot on the museum's frequently asked questions page on the website, which is good. So come, learn a bit from such classics like the Rack or the Brazen Bull, so you don't accidentally end up repeating those. I don't think I can even possibly describe what either of those horrifying things do without getting this channel permanently flagged, so if you're curious, maybe take the worst Google trip of your life, or go up and visit the Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. They've got locations all over the states for your pleasure, and there's even one in Europe, but I'm pretty sure that's a different one. The one I'm talking about right now is the American one. The one in Chicago even offers a ghost hunting tour, as some guests believe there are residual spirits tied to some of the more grisly equipment kept in the dungeons. Guests are invited to spend the night on their own accord or with the safety of a tour guide to try and uncover any of the spirits that are said to be still living there, including an old executioner named Thomas who loves his work so much he just never left. Sheesh. Nearly 1,000 years and he still doesn't take a day off. Some people just love to have their nose to the grindstone, or to forcefully shove someone else's face into the grindstone, to each their own.
Number 3. Joyland Deaths. Located in Wichita, Kansas, Joyland once featured state-of-the-art rides and attractions, holding a reign of 55 years of fun and joy. Today, the once popular park is being reclaimed by nature, piece by piece by piece. So Joyland came into existence on June 12th of 1949 and was founded by Lester Ottaway and his sons, Herbert and Harold. Herb Ottaway had a passion for steam engines and race cars, and he refurbished both types of vehicles. By 1934, Herb had refurbished a miniature steam locomotive and cars and was traveling with them to county fairs in Kansas and Colorado. Joyland was open to give Herb's refurbished locomotive a more permanent home. As the attraction became more popular, the Ottaways eventually added a number of different rides and games to the amusement park. Lester Ottaway passed away in the mid-1950s, and his sons continued running Joyland until the early 1970s when they decided to retire. Joyland was then sold to Stanley and Margaret Nelson, who owned the park until it closed its doors in 2004. Joyland featured attractions such as a wooden roller coaster, which I love, a wacky shacky dark ride, a log jam, a sky coaster, bumper cars, a carousel, and a Ferris wheel. On April 6th of 2004, a 13-year-old girl was enjoying a Ferris wheel ride with her friends when the restraint bar holding them in came undone. The young girl fell more than 30 feet, suffering multiple head, arm, and leg injuries. The Ferris wheel was immediately closed while both private and federal investigators looked into whether everything was safe and up to code. The ride was later reopened after these investigations were wrapped up. Also, another notable ride at Joyland was the wooden roller coaster that was known as the Nightmare. Although the roller coaster was a staple at the amusement park, it too saw its fair share of injuries, which is a shame. Like, I really love wooden coasters. On May 25th of 1977, somebody in the single digits of age stood up in one of the carts and fell, died at the scene from the injuries sustained from the fall. Another death occurred 20 years later, on August 27th of 1998, when 35-year-old maintenance worker Kevin Briley was under the ride trimming the grass. He stood up and was tragically hit by the coaster and passed away. My heart hurts telling that tale because, like I said already, I'm such a huge lover of traditional wooden roller coasters. You know, there's just something about narrowly avoiding whiplash that I personally find thrilling. And go figure, Joyland closed its doors in 2004. Number 2, doomed before it could open. The Pripyat amusement park was set to have its grand opening on May 1st of 1986, in time for the May Day celebrations, but these plans were cancelled on April 26th when the Chernobyl disaster occurred, just a couple of kilometers away. Several sources report that the park was opened for a short time on April 27th before the announcement to evacuate the city was made to distract, residents from the unfolding disaster nearby. Constructed under the Soviet Union as a park of culture and rest, typical of many large cities in the then Soviet Union, the amusement park's attractions were manufactured by the Yeskik-based firm Attraction, who were responsible for the construction of many of the amusement parks which remain to be seen around the former Soviet Union today in various states of repair. Located northwest to the Palace of Culture in the center of Pripyat, the park had 5 attractions. The iconic 26-meter Ferris wheel titled Circular Overview, Autodrome bumper cars, a paratrooper ride called Chamomile, Russian swing boats, and also a carnival Pew Pew game. Fun fact, the successor to the original company is still manufacturing the Ferris wheel, paratrooper, and bumper cars to the similar designs as of 2017. Radiation levels around the park kind of vary though. The liquidators washed radiation into the soil after the helicopters carrying radioactive materials used the grounds as a landing strip, so concrete areas are less radioactive. However, areas where moss has built up can emit levels amongst the highest levels of radiation in the whole of Pripyat. So the Ferris wheel actually made news in September of 2017 when Polish tourists turned it mechanically for the first time since 1986. Thankfully, they returned it back to its original position, but kinda neat that it could still work. Number 1, a cursed history. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park opened its doors in 1926 when proprietor Conley Snidow Sr. purchased the land. His vision to build a place for local families to relax and enjoy time together was realized as the coal miners from local towns descended on it each year, making it a fantastic destination for summer vacations. The park was full of activities. It featured a man-made swimming lake, a racetrack, concessions, and cabins for visitors, looking for an overnight stay. The big cornerstones were the Ferris wheel and the swings, 2 rides that were popular with everyone who spent time at the park. And you know what? That all sounds pretty idyllic to me. Tragedy, though, began to grip the amusement park in the 1950s, when several deaths shocked locals. A young girl's life ended on the swing ride when a delivery truck backed into her seat, killing her in place. Another youngster lost his life when he drowned in the swimming pool after his arm got stuck in a drain pipe. And by 1966, this amusement park closed its doors to the public, and the land sat dormant for decades. In the 1980s, the park again welcomed visitors when Gaylord White acquired the land and set out to restore it to its former glory. In addition to purchasing a Ferris wheel, he found a swing ride that seemed just like the swings that once thrilled guests. No, Fun fact, when they installed the swings on the property, they realized the swings weren't just similar, they were the exact same swings from years prior, something that they decided to advertise during the grand reopening. The Lake Shawnee amusement park welcomed tens of thousands of visitors during its second run, which ran for just 3 years in the 1980s. Unfortunately, high insurance prices forced the White family to close their doors for the second and final time after those couple of short seasons, forcing them to pivot to other activities to keep the land active. They hosted fishing tournaments in what used to be the swimming lake, and they planned to create a space on the property for mud bogging, a motorsport the family knew would draw crowds to watch. While excavating a mud bogging track, the White family made a series of surprising discoveries that added depth to the property's history. For starters, the park was built over a Native American burial ground, with an archaeological dig uncovering 13 bodies, mostly young folks. In the 1700s, the property was the active home base for the Native Americans until they seemed to suddenly disappear. Among the bracelets, clothing, and tools that excavators found, they also found mass graves that suggested as many as 30,000 people had been buried on the property. But, that's not the darkest history of the land. In 1783, Mitchell Clay was the first European settler to make a home in the area, which was heavily inhabited by the Shawnee Native American tribe. So while Clay was gone to town one day, the Shawnees surrounded 3 of the Clay descendants who were working in the fields. Bartley met his end first, and Tabitha, hearing the explosion, ran to her brother, where she was attacked and cut by a stabby implement. Her body was dismembered, and both of their scalps were taken by the entire group. Their brother Ezekiel was captured and burned at the stake. A historical marker on the road leading to the park commemorates their memories. One could wonder if the tragic history of the grounds is the reason for the 6 deaths that occurred at the park, eventually leading to it being closed down in 1966. And many locals, including the park's new owner, claim the park to still be haunted. In 5th place, we have the Kramp Nitz Eagle. Alrighty, time for the usual disclaimers, because the tube that is you does not like people chatting about all things World War II, so this girlie has to be kinda goofy to get around that and get my point across. We're gonna chat about the bad guys, whose name starts with an N, but I'll be referring to them as Yahtzees. If you have an issue with that, take it up somewhere else. I've just gotta follow the interweb rules. Kramp Nitz in Germany was used as a cavalry training center during the First World War, and then as a motorized vehicle barracks by the bad German guys during the Second World War, housing motorbikes, tanks, and armored vehicles. When the Russians took Berlin, the Germans fled, handing themselves over to the British and US forces rather than be captured by the Red Army, who soon claimed Kramp Nitz as their own. Yahtzee imagery, especially with the big bad symbol, whose name starts with an S, was banned in Germany after the war, and rightfully so. I know it wasn't originally a big bad symbol. I'm quite informed on the history of it and the name and different pronunciations, but trust me, that's just the easiest way to get my point across. I think I'm doing enough dancing around words right now. I don't want to make anyone's head spin, least of all my own. Examples in public places were destroyed, and it is still illegal to display them outside of authorized exhibitions. However, at Kramp Nitz, this original and painstakingly crafted mosaic inlaid with gold leaf remained for decades. Some speculated the Russians may have kept it as a trophy of sorts, explaining its remarkable survival. But it remained there even after the Russians finally abandoned the site in 1992. The Kramp Nitz eagle appears to have been the very last genuine example of its kind. It was a haunting reminder of the reality of humanity's darkest days. It was eventually destroyed in the mid-2010s, and while I don't believe that Yahtzee stuff should be paraded about, it is kind of a shame that such intricate art has been lost to time. In 4th place, we have pickled creatures. Reminds me of right after high school, when I was helping to clean out my grandma's basement and found jars of pickled unknowns that had been pickled like before I was born. I was very grateful that none of the jars were open or broken, because who knows what they had turned into by that point. Hoarding is genetic, and I am determined to break the chain of women from that side of my family tree drowning in belongings. Alrighty, back on track for now, I promise. Blame my ADHD. Anderlecht Veterinary College in Brussels was built in 1912 in a pretty Belgian neo-Renaissance style, but left abandoned in 1991 when the whole campus moved location to the eastern Belgian town of Liège. Gosh, neo-Renaissance architecture is so stunning, don't you think? Feel free to let me know in the comments what your favorite architecture style is. It could be a fun debate. The various buildings, which once contained pens for cattle and cages for primates and other mammals, were gradually converted, but one remained empty long after the others. Upstairs was a grand lecture hall complete with rows of plush red theater-like chairs, while beautiful marble staircases and brass banisters adorned the other floors. The kind of place, you just want to marvel at and curl up in, just to imagine lives that came before yours. Down in the basement, however, lurking in a dark and long disused room, were hundreds of macabre specimens of animals preserved in glass jars. I'm talking baby pigs, cows, and even parts of dogs, cats, and horses were among them. I'm glad my research elaborated on part of, because for a moment I was trying to picture a container large enough to hold a horse, and it was kinda terrifying. Jawbones, internal organs, and some whole animals all waited to greet any unsuspecting explorer, with their glassy, faded eyes staring out through the yellowish tint of formaldehyde. Good old formaldehyde. Some were smashed and laid rotting on tables and floors, making for a truly bizarre and disturbing sight, especially down there in the darkness, and only lit by torchlight. Also, imagine the smell. Okay, moving on before I gag from my overactive imagination taking over.
Number 3. The Penang War Museum. I think it's a very good sign that your museum is a friendly, welcoming place. If you Google it and the first results are an article called The Horrors on Ghost Hill and a listing for an IMDb episode for a series called I Wouldn't Go There featuring your museum, it's either really hurting or really helping the tourism there. Well, if those warning signs weren't enough to deter you, enter the Penang War Museum, my little ghouls and goblins. It's been described as one of the most haunted spots in Asia, flat out. The Penang Museum is built atop the grave of an old army fort built by the British in the 1930s, but was taken control by the Japanese in the late 30s in World War II, and used to house prisoners for as long as the prisoners lived, which was, usually not very long, if the site of the guillotine is anything to go by. After the end of the Second World War, the place had become totally abandoned, until it was retrofitted to become a museum, and serve as a reminder of the grim reality of war and its costs. The whole place kind of has this eerie, abandoned ghost town vibe as you walk through tunnels and old bunkers, serving to try and replicate what it would be like to actually work and spend time in a place like this while it was functioning. Given the very grim nature of the content and the site itself, which was home to so much bloodshed, death, hatred, and all the worst parts of our souls, it's no surprise that the museum has an infamous reputation as a spot for paranormal activity. Guests have reported seeing strange sightings, unusual shadows, and feeling chills as they walk through the bunkers. But all of this begs the question, would ghosts even be scarier than the actual truth of this place? Now, I've never been, but from what I was looking at and gathering for this, it seems to me like the true horror of the Penang Museum is that it's a reflection of some of the worst parts of the human experience. A reminder of what happens during wartime and what people do to one another. This place doesn't need stories of spirits. It's haunted enough as is by the memories that will forever be tied to it. Number 2. The Mutter Museum. Mutter is the German word for mother. That's your fact for today, so you can tell your Mutter that you learned something from this video. Well, this isn't a museum for moms or about moms, although they're more than welcome to come. The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia isn't quite like the other museums on this list. It's not particularly known for being paranormal or haunted, but rather it's a collection of medical oddities and curios all arranged behind cabinets in a very clean, professional manner. It's not known for vengeful spirits or anything walking the halls, but rather just home to an incredible amount of very creepy things in jars. Every picture of the place looks like something out of a mad scientist's lab, a background of a B horror movie set, that one weird place in that one Harry Potter movie, maybe I'm remembering that wrong. Amputated limbs float in jars next to organs, fetuses from all sorts of animals you can imagine, and more bones than you could possibly shake a femur at. They got skulls of all kinds. They got skulls for days. They got an entire wall dedicated solely to the skulls of criminals, and all sorts of broken skulls in disarray, eaten by tumors or other lovely diseases. If you're looking for skulls, they have got skulls. They've got a collection of famous remnants, Albert Einstein's brain if you want to see if some of that rubs off on you, Grover Cleveland's famous tumor. Well, we all love Grover Cleveland's tumor. Pack the whole car up. Let's go see that. You know, fun stuff. Now, guests who visit the Mutter Museum do pretty frequently complain of feeling dizzy and uneasy while wandering through the collection, but whether or not that's because of some poltergeist or spiritual influence, or because you're wandering through a 6,000 square foot room looking at hundreds of brains, bones, and disembodied organs in jars, is up for some debate. I know just reading about this thing already makes me feel kind of squeamish, makes my stomach feel all churny. I wonder if they have a little cafe in this one, like most museums have. You think anybody's eating there? And number 1, the Museum of Death. The Museum of Death. Well, I wonder what sort of topics they enjoy covering at the Museum of Death. I bet they have an absolutely illuminating look at pre-Raphaelite art of the late 19th to early 20th centuries. They don't? What? No, at the Museum of Death, opened in Hollywood in 1995, which was opened by a married couple with the intention to make people happy to be alive. Whew. How do they accomplish this? Do they show you pictures of whiskers on kittens and raindrops on roses? No, of course not. It's a collection of everything to do with death. Bones, skulls, coffins, ancient mortician's tools, executioner's equipment, and a whole lot more. Amusingly, the owners have said their goal is not to scare anyone with this museum. That's not what their museum is about. Now sure, they play videos of autopsies, and they have footage and imagery from incredibly grisly and stomach-churning real-life true crime cases, like artifacts from Charles Manson's family, or some of of Jeffrey Dahmer's personal effects, but they don't want to scare you. The museum is there to show death in its brutal, unedited honesty. The owners themselves describe it as a commemoration of life. And I gotta be honest, I'm making it sound worse than it is, but it definitely does sound interesting. And the grimmest parts of me are definitely more than a little curious to check it out in that morbid sort of way, because it sounds cool. Probably a great date spot to take a goth girl, I bet. The museum does kind of embrace its sort of twisted reputation. It really runs with it. It hosts Black Dahlia costume contests where guests are judged on who's got the best post-mortem Black Dahlia costume, which is something. It's not thought to be as haunted as some of the other places on this list, but it does really bring out some visceral reactions in people. Apparently, it's not too uncommon for guests to demand to leave early or to outright faint while walking through the museum. The owners refer to these cases as falling down ovations, which is a very funny turn of a phrase. Now, sadly, if you're listening to all of this and you're already pre-buying tickets for your next trip to LA, sadly, the museum is currently closed down. They are reopening though. They've also got a museum in New Orleans, since their collection of macabre knickknacks is so large it couldn't be contained to just one spot. When it reopens, I recommend you get out as soon as you can. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Coming in at number 5, we have Tianducheng, China. Tianducheng is a town in the suburbs of Hangzhou, China, whose construction began around 2007. Built as an enormous luxury housing development, Tianducheng emulates the famous French City of Lights in everything, from the period-correct architecture to the 300-foot-tall miniature Eiffel Tower. It even has a replica fountain from the Luxembourg Gardens. The city centre is an abandoned copy of Paris that even features the Eiffel Tower, which is 1/3 of its original size. With the capacity for over 100,000 residents, the city has remained mostly abandoned except for the employees of a nearby French-themed amusement park, according to City Lab. Tianducheng lacks much of what Paris has to offer though, including people. The lack of people is mostly attributed to its odd location, as Tianducheng is surrounded mostly by farmland and odd dead-end roads that snake throughout the countryside. When it first opened its gates more than a decade ago, it was described as a ghost town. While many of its homes remain vacant, the population has grown into the thousands, and it attracts a steady stream of Chinese and international tourists, including newlyweds looking for a picture-perfect backdrop. In at number 4, we have Ruby, Arizona. Ruby, Arizona is one of the best preserved abandoned cities in the United States, filled with history and the shell of the city it used to be. By the 1870s, new prospectors made several additional claims, and the fledgling settlement formed at the mountain base was called Montana Camp. Other lead, copper, and zinc veins were also found in the immediate vicinity, beckoning yet more miners to the fledgling settlement. Throughout the years, the city and mining company associated with it got passed down to many different owners. While in the 1914s, Andrew sold the store to Philip C. Clark, who soon built a bigger and better one just up the hill, the remains of which still stand today. Though Ruby was growing, it was still a lawless place, and finally Philip Clark became so concerned for his family's safety that he moved them away to nearby Oro Blanco. However, he continued to work towards growing the city of Ruby and amassed large amounts of land and cattle until 1920, when he sold the store to brothers John and Alexander Frazier. From 1934 to 1937, the Montana mine was the leading producer of lead and zinc in the state, and the 3rd largest in silver production. However, the ore finally played out in 1940, and the town became a ghost. The mill operation was moved to Sahuarita. The post office closed forever on May 31st, 1941, though no records exist on the dollar amount taken from the Montana mine. One estimate puts the total for the Oro Blanco district at more than 10 million for the period between 1909 and 1949. The ruby mines remained intact until 1970, when they finally collapsed. For decades, the area remained private because no access was allowed to anyone other than the owners. Ruby has suffered from vandalism and theft often. Today, Ruby remains private, owned by a couple of different families working to preserve the town and make it into a recreational area. The good news is they now allow visitors. The old settlement continues to boast more than 24 buildings. Only Vulture City rivals it in the number of remaining structures in a ghost town mining camp.
In 3rd place, we have a mummified body. Okay, Alexa, you can do it. You can fight the urge to hurl. Back in August of 2022, police in Milwaukee were asking for the public's help in identifying a man whose body was found in an abandoned building, and yep, you guessed it, most of the body was mummified. The remains were found on August 10th at 231 West Burleigh Street. Apparently the body was found by a YouTuber, but no clue as to who it might have been. Amy, the lead forensic investigator at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office, said the body had no identification on it. The medical examiner's office said a majority of the remains were mummified, except for the head, feet, and one hand. Because of the mummification, the medical examiner's office was able to identify tattoos on the body and submit them into a database. According to an investigation report from that examiner's office, the building was a multi-use building, with a church on the first floor and rooms upstairs, but had long been abandoned according to that report. Now, this spokesperson said the person appears to be a black male based on the features discovered in the autopsy. The body also had tattoos and 5 rings on the fingers. One of the tattoos on the left arm says King, and another on the right arm has the letters SAVA. The body had further tattoos, but they were too hard for investigators to distinguish. The man was also wearing a red allergy bracelet that was, commonly used in hospitals. According to officials, the man had on multiple layers of clothing, including athletic pants and long underwear. He was also wearing what appeared to be like 2 jackets, so lots of layers. According to the autopsy report, from what they could tell, he didn't really have any injuries, and there was no signs of drug use. Fun fact, bodies left in hot, freezing environments can typically mummify in about 2 weeks, while the process typically takes a couple of months in enclosed locations. Remains in mild environments take about 3 months. When a person dies, the countdown to decomposition begins, as digestive enzymes start breaking down cells inside the body. In most cases, enzymes need to be in an aqueous environment to work, so if the fluids are removed, decomposition slows down. During spontaneous mummification, the body loses water more rapidly than the enzyme's destructive actions can operate. Bodies buried in crypts can accidentally mummify if ventilation, is a thing. Not every part of the body mummifies at the same time though. Like some internal organs, like the heart, take a lot longer to dry out, which makes sense. Whereas the hands, toes, and scrotum are among the fastest body parts to dry out. Like I said before, the environment can speed up the process, often through extreme temperatures or pH levels that slow down the enzyme activity. Sometimes the soil surrounding the body plays a big part as well, either through osmosis or because heavy metals in the dirt can impede the enzymes. Even clothes can help mummification because they act as a wick that absorbs bodily fluids from the skin. In addition to protecting the remains from the body's process of decomposing, the environmental conditions also have to defend against external threats like bacteria, fungi, and animals in order to ensure that a mummy will last. Figured that would all be worth learning about because why not? Am I still queasy? Sure, but it was worth it. In second place, we have the haunted crane mirror. So dating back to 1833, St. Bridget's Asylum in Ireland is among the oldest surviving examples of such buildings. It first opened its doors in, 1833 as the Connaught District Lunatic Asylum and was considered one of the earliest of the Irish district asylums, hailing a new progressive role in mental health for Ireland, stating that it would care for the curable lunatics. I know that's out-of-date terminology, but it's a direct quote from history, not my own words. Hey, under that hospital standards, I'd fall under that category myself. Until recent history, ADHD was something people could grow out of, and that was something I was taught as a kid. I more so grew into mine, but that's not our point today. With the deinstitutionalization of mental health and the constant overcrowding, St. Bridget's Psychiatric Hospital was forced to close its doors in 2013. Designed in a prison-like radial plan from grim gray stone, by the 1920s it was grossly overcrowded. Designed originally for 840 patients, but holding almost 1,500. Sadly, this was the norm for many institutions, and not the exception. While many started off as well-meaning, and this was, all over the world, demand was just too high and the pressure to overfill was given into. So there are 5 main styles of asylum design: the corridor, pavilion, echelon, colony, but I'll elaborate more on the radial plan I mentioned for this place. The radial plan saw the long wings of the asylum radiate outwards from a central point, thus reflecting the style of prisons of that era. This style was considered inhumane even in its day, due to the lack of natural light, circulation of air, and space for airing courts. So, okay, maybe this specific asylum never had good intentions. Like all good mysteries, the crane mirror discovered in one of the rooms by urban explorers posed some intriguing questions. Standing alone in an otherwise unremarkable room, with its strange seashell motif and intricate dancing carved wooden cranes, it stood around 12 feet tall and suggested something perhaps more at home in a ballet school. But in the 19th century, and within an asylum, that explanation seemed most unlikely. Larger than any door or window in that room, I kinda wonder how they even managed to get it in there. But also, why go to such trouble? Was it some sort of strange passion project installed at the request of a former medical superintendent? Could there really have been ballet classes in an asylum, or was it part of some strange type of therapy? Perhaps it covered up like a doorway or something else hidden behind it, and if so, what? No satisfactory answer has yet been found. Explorers have mentioned that that specific room felt ice cold when they were in it, almost as if some sort of spirit had attached themselves to the area, which sounds accurate to me. While I couldn't find a death rate for the asylum, just assume it was high, and at least some poor soul passed there when they shouldn't have. I feel like I'm forgetting something. It'll come to me. Oh right, a different urban explorer found an old abandoned coffin sitting alone in the basement, which she thankfully discovered was empty. Personally, I don't think I would have dared open the thing. I'm too disgusted by what could be, and fearful of curses, but All the power to her. In first place, we have the West Park Asylum Brain Matter. Time to travel to another asylum, West Park Asylum, and this time to the abandoned mortuary and pathology labs, which sat nestled among the trees in a corner of the site. It had once been tucked away behind the asylum's chapel, but that was demolished back in the 1980s to make way for a staff car park, because priorities. Parking over history. Being home to up to 2,545 patients, death visited the asylum regularly, and the mortuary fridges had room for up to 12 bodies to be stored at any one time. Something about that ratio makes me think the morgue got overfilled quite a bit. One could wander the shabby abandoned wards of the asylum after closure and read the old logbooks that described patients dying in the night or after a fall or injury. Fluid and tissue samples were taken from some patients and stored in boxes or on glass slides, including chunks of brain, sealed in paraplast blocks, which is a waxy paraffin-based substance for later study. Being unmarked, no one knows who they once belonged to, what they died of, or what lessons might have been learned from them. Anything that remained would have been eventually thrown away or burned, along with all the other fascinating artifacts this crazy asylum once contained. I'm both fascinated and grossed out by this. Not sure which side is winning. And that brings us to the end of our time, and I think I'm definitely horrified. Talking about mental institutions takes a lot out of me mentally. Pun not intended.
Number 5 on this list is Hashima Island. Hashima Island is honestly something straight out of a movie. In fact, it was even used in a movie before. For those James Bond fans out there, this island was where the villain in Skyfall had his evil lair. The History Network writes, Hashima Island is a vacant labyrinth of crumbling concrete, sea walls, and deserted buildings, yet it was once among the most densely populated places on the planet. The small island off the coast of Nagasaki was first settled in 1887 as a coal mining colony. It was later purchased by Mitsubishi, which built some of the world's first multi-story reinforced concrete buildings to house its bursting population. Hashima remained a hive of activity for the next several decades, especially during World War II, when the Japanese forced thousands of Korean laborers and Chinese POWs to toil in its mines. By the 1950s, the 16-acre rock was packed to the gills with more than 5,200 residents. Most workers found the cramped conditions unlivable, and the city was probably abandoned after the mine closed in 1974. 40 years of neglect have left Hashima a dilapidated ruin of collapsed staircases and condemned apartments. Many of its high-rises are still filled with old televisions and other relics from the mid-20th century, and its once teeming swimming pools, barbershop, and school classrooms now sit in shambles. Similar to a lot of other entries on this list, this place isn't unfamiliar with death. A lot of those POWs who were forced to work here, they didn't make it out alive. Coal mining conditions were bad for those who did it voluntarily, but for those who were forced to do it, it was even worse. This place is just as cool as it is creepy. Like an abandoned island with high-rises definitely gives a cool, explorative vibe, but at the same point, there have been some creepy sightings here before. The mines are definitely believed to be haunted. People think that there are some sort of creatures living down there. Like the toxic fumes of the mine mutated someone or something, and now there are these demons living down there. Only way to know for sure is if you find out for yourself, but I wouldn't recommend it. Number 4 on this list is Varosha. The story behind Varosha doesn't seem like anything that would happen in today's world. History Network says, in the early 1970s, the immaculate beaches of Varosha, Cyprus served as one of the most popular millionaires' playgrounds in the Mediterranean. The suburb boasted a thriving tourism economy, and celebrities such as Elizabeth Taylor and Bridget Bardot were known to take in the sand and sun at its high-class beachfront hotels. All that changed in August 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus and occupied its northern third in response to a Greek nationalist-led coup. Varosha's 15,000 residents fled the city in terror, leaving their valuables and livelihoods behind. Most assumed they would return once the fighting stopped, but ongoing political strife has seen Varosha waste away behind a heavily guarded barrier ever since. The few intrepid explorers who had ventured into the no-man's land described the resort as a crumbling ghost town. Trees have grown through the floors of restaurants and homes, and most of the former residents' belongings have been looted or destroyed. What is left stands as a spooky time capsule of the 1970s, including bell-bottoms and shop windows and 40-year-old vehicles still parked at car dealerships. Imagine fleeing your home with 15,000 other people and then just literally never being able to go back. We currently live in a society where, for the most part, we feel pretty safe and in our routines. But when you hear about something like this, it just puts life in perspective. That's how quick our entire lives can change and be totally uprooted. In a matter of minutes, we've lost our homes, our jobs, our money, and we're now fending for our lives. What's left of this place is just a sad reminder of the lives that all these people were forced to leave behind.
In at number 3 we have Wittenoom, Australia. Located 1400 miles northeast of Perth, Australia lies Wittenoom, a former blue asbestos mining town that has since been named the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere. Despite signs warning people to keep away, thousands of tourists visit each year, much to the risk of their own health. Up until the 1930s, the area surrounding Wittenoom was largely unused, until Langley Hancock discovered blue asbestos crocodilite in an area, unknowing at the time, but this is the most dangerous type of asbestos. It was typically used in rope lacking and pipe insulation, as well as in cement sheets and for ceiling tiles. During the 1950s, Wittenoom was the area's largest settlement, with a peak population of an estimated 20,000 coming and going from the town. For over a decade, Wittenoom was the only supplier of blue asbestos in Australia, exporting 150,000 tons. In 1966, the Wittenoom Gorge mine was closed due to unprofitability and increasing concerns over the health of miners. The following year, Australia banned the mining of blue asbestos. Of those who worked and resided in the town, over 2,000 have since died from illnesses caused by asbestos, including lung cancer, asbestosis, and mesothelioma. In 2007, the town was completely delisted, meaning it was completely shut down and then removed from the map. The town has literally been wiped from the map. Local tourist brochures just leave a vague blank area where Wittenoom actually is, and the national park don't feature the town despite covering everywhere else within a 1,000-kilometer radius. Coming in at number 2 we have Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Close to the border of Iran, Ashgabat, Turkmenistan is a former Soviet Union country run by President Saparmurat Niyazov. Much of the city was destroyed by the 1948 Ashgabat earthquake, where buildings crumbled to the ground, but has since been extensively rebuilt under the rule of the new president. The president planned to create a golden era of Turkmenistan in 1991 with the building of Ashgabat. He did so by building the city with the most marble buildings in the world. Thus, Ashgabat, the Turkmenistan capital, is a city of marble buildings and fountains. It is also an empty city with a population of around 700,000 people. Though the majority of the population doesn't live in the city, they live in the suburbs that are located outside the city limits. The only residents in Ashgabat are made of marble, as is the whole city. The buildings in the city are all made of white marble. The marbled maze of buildings and statues is very much the facade of the museum district, and it is these images that have gone around the world showcasing what can be done with millions of dollars at your disposal. Governments, museums, and theatre buildings, as well as expanses of parks, dominate the whole district. The unique looking architecture is nothing similar to that of any other city. There are few reasons why no one is permitted to live in the city, and for one is to keep the white marble clean. Another reason is that it gets so hot that it's not practical to walk in. Moreover, the public is forbidden to talk about the fact that the city is empty. Thus, one can only infer that the city was not built for the locals but used as a statue object to show the richness of the government. Today, the city is referred to as the City of the Dead because it appears so empty. This is in part also because of the country's isolated culture, as Turkmenistan is one of the least visited countries in the world. And finally, in at number 1 we have Hashima Island in Japan. Just 15 kilometers from Nagasaki and in front of the Japanese coastline, you'll find the abandoned island and city of Hashima. In the late 1950s, the island had a population of over 5,200 people. The people that resided on the island were mostly coal miners and their families. Since the island is so small at its peak in population, it was once the most densely populated place on the planet and 9 times the population density of Tokyo. Now the island is left completely abandoned and is effectively crumbling to pieces. The coal mining facility was previously called Battleship Island because its buildings and seawall make it resemble a warship. As for the island's fate, it was abandoned in the 1970s when petroleum fuels made coal obsolete. The island was built by Korean and Chinese prisoners who were forced to work after World War II. The conditions of these forced laborers were hard, and some never made it back home. The people who worked here named the island Jail Island or even Hell Island. In 1974, the mine started to run out of coal and people left the island. Soon the island's uninhabited parts were reclaimed by nature. The weather conditions started affecting the concrete and buildings started falling apart. Sometimes people camped out here, but that was a very dangerous thing to do. The government wanted to discourage people from going over on their own, and therefore decided to open it to the public. Even though tourists are allowed to visit the island today, the echoes of the past still linger here. Fishermen who sail near the island claim they have seen strange flickering lights in the buildings, even though the island has no electricity. Strange noises have been heard and cold spots have been felt. People say that they had the sensation of being watched, and there were some claims of people that had been touched by unseen hands. Coming in at 5, Hashima Island, Japan. Hashima Island is an abandoned island lying about 15 kilometers from the city of Nagasaki in southern Japan. It is one of 505 uninhabited islands in Nagasaki Prefecture. The island's most notable features are its abandoned concrete buildings, undisturbed except by nature and the surrounding sea wall. While the island is a symbol of the rapid industrialization of Japan, it is also a reminder of its history as a site of forced labor prior to and during the Second World War. The island reached a peak population of 5,259 in 1959, and in 1974, with the coal reserves nearing depletion, the mine was closed and all of the residents departed soon after, leaving the island effectively abandoned for the following 3 decades. Interest in the island then re-emerged in the 2000s on account of its undisturbed historic ruins, and it gradually became a tourist attraction. The island is increasingly gaining international attention, not only generally for its modern regional heritage, but also for the undisturbed housing complex remnants representative of the period from the Taisho period to the Showa period. It has become a frequent subject of discussion among enthusiasts for ruins. Since the abandoned island has not been maintained, several buildings have collapsed mainly due to typhoon damage, and other buildings are in danger of collapse. However, some of the collapsed exterior walls have been restored with concrete. The island was formally approved as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in July 2015 as part of Japan's sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution, iron and steel, shipbuilding and coal mining. In at 4, Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. The Eastern State Penitentiary, also known as ESP, is a former prison in Philadelphia that was operational from 1829 until 1971. The penitentiary refined the revolutionary system of separate incarceration first pioneered at the Walnut Street Jail, which emphasized principles of reform rather than punishment. Notorious criminals such as Al Capone and bank robber Willie Sutton were also held inside its innovative wagon wheel design. Originally, inmates were housed in cells that could only be accessed by entering through a small exercise yard attached to the back of the prison. Only a small portal, just large enough to pass meals, opened onto the cell blocks. The design in turn proved impractical, and in the middle of construction, cells were constructed that allowed prisoners to enter and leave the cell blocks through metal doors that were covered by a heavy wood door to filter out noise. Some believe that the doors were small so prisoners would have a harder time getting out, minimizing an attack on a security guard. Others have explained the small doors forced the prisoners to bow while entering their cells. This design is related to penance and ties to the religious inspiration of the prison. The prison was one of the largest public work projects of the early Republic and was a tourist destination in the 19th century. Visitors spoke with prisoners in their cells, proving that inmates were not isolated, though the prisoners themselves were not allowed to have any visits with family or friends during their stay. The prison is now abandoned, however it operates as a museum and historic site, open year-round. However, those who have visited have noted a weird presence inside its walls, and it is said that its former inmates haven't quite left the building yet.
Number 3 on this list is Bodie. Bodie is a small ghost town located in California. This town was once a booming little community back in the late 1800s. Eventually it busted though, and by the 1940s the last few residents had to clear out because no one was coming anymore. It was a town for gold-crazed prospectors and sounds like something right out of a western classic. The town was known not only for its gold but also its drunken shootouts, brothels, gangsters, and drugs. It feels like the type of place that you would go to in Red Dead Redemption or something like that. It was actually known to many around the area as the Sea of Sin because of all of this. Eventually it just ran out of money though, and slowly everyone had to leave. It's one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in the world though, and gives visitors a very clear picture of the darker side to the west back in the day. If you ever had dreams of being a western cowboy gangster, then this is definitely the town for you. Number 2 in this list is Pripyat. Pripyat is located in Ukraine and definitely checks all of the creepy creepy abandoned boxes. It's one of the main places that got affected by the nuclear accident that happened at Chernobyl. Back in 1986, the power plant had a horrible disaster, and the 49,000 people who were living in this town, they all had to leave. Anyone who was left behind or didn't go would have died soon after from the radiation poisoning. Many of the people who did leave had to deal with horrible health ramifications anyways, because that's just how bad Chernobyl actually was. Now the town is left completely abandoned and in ruins. Nature is slowly taking control of what we've left behind. There was a small amusement park that once stood here, and it's now a picturesque scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Everything about this town screams creepy. Not to mention the fact that people have talked about potential mutant creatures living here. That hasn't been confirmed, but it's definitely heavily rumored by the locals. We still aren't allowed to go here for long periods of time because of the radiation poisoning, and it may actually take centuries before it can be settled in again. And finally, number 1 on this list is Oradour-sur-Glane. This once bustling French town is just a mass of rubble now after being completely decimated during World War II. The History Network says, on the afternoon of June 10th, 1944, the village of Oradour-sur-Glane was the scene of one of the worst massacres of French civilians during World War II. In what is believed to have been an act of revenge for the town's supposed support of the French resistance, a German Waffen-SS detachment rounded up and murdered 642 of its residents and burned most of their homes to the ground. Only a handful of people managed to survive by playing dead and later fleeing to the forest. A new Oradour-sur-Glane was built nearby after the war ended, but French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the burned out ruins of the old town be left untouched as a monument to the victims. The facades of dozens of brick buildings and charred storefronts still remain, as well as graveyards of rusted cars and bicycles, scattered sewing machines, and unused tram tracks. 642 residents. This just goes to show how horrible World War II actually was. 642 innocent people were killed on June 10th that day, and honestly guys, I didn't even know about this incident until I started researching for this video. Atrocities of this nature were simply commonplace during that time, which is just terrible to admit. Obviously, this abandoned town is teeming with paranormal activity and is one of the saddest and darkest spots in all of France. People who have been through here have explained that sadness is literally palpable. The air grows thick and heavy, as if there are other presences around you that you can't see or touch. Several apparitions have been reported here, as well as a deep fog that comes over the town very suddenly and without warning. Based on what happened here so many years ago, it's no wonder that this place is abandoned.
Number 5, Chernobyl. I've made the executive decision to kick off today with the most obvious location. For those who might not be aware of the horrors of Chernobyl, allow me to start today off with a mini sad history lesson. So the disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April of 1986 at the number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat. It is one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents rated at 7, which is the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other being the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. The meltdown and explosions ruptured the reactor core. And destroyed the reactor building. So this was immediately followed by an open-air reactor core fire, which lasted until May 4th of 1986. During which airborne radioactive contaminants were released and deposited onto other parts of the USSR and Europe. Approximately 70% landed in Belarus, around 16 kilometers away. The fire released about the same amount of radioactive material as the initial explosion. In response to the initial accident, a 10-kilometer radius exclusion zone was created 36 hours after the accident, from which approximately 49,000 people were evacuated, primarily from Pripyat. The exclusion zone was later increased to a radius of 30 kilometers, from which an additional 68,000 people were evacuated. Following the disaster, Pripyat was abandoned and eventually replaced by the new purpose-built city of Slavutych. In July of 2019, the Ukrainian president announced that the Chernobyl site would become an official tourist attraction. Immunology experts recommend that tourists wear clothes and shoes they are comfortable with throwing away, avoid plant life, especially the depths of the forest due to the high levels of radiation. Oh, why? Oh, just because the areas were not cleaned in the aftermath of the disaster and remain highly contaminated. Research showed that that fungus, moss, and mushrooms are radioactive. So among the buildings that were abandoned were multiple schools, with the small city having 15 preschools for just under 5,000 attendees. Most of the buildings in the city are practically empty, but not the schools. School books and class magazines were clearly of no value to looters, and city residents were more worried about saving at least something from their personal property, leaving the buildings almost intact, minus the effects of being left empty over time. Moving on to other places of note, the Pripyat amusement park was set to have its grand opening on the 1st of May in 1986, in time for the May Day celebrations, but those plans were cancelled on April 26. Several sources report that the park was opened for a short time on the 27th before the announcement to evacuate the city was made to distract the residents from the unfolding disaster nearby. Constructed under the Soviet Union as a park of culture and rest, typical of many large cities in the then Soviet Union, the amusement park's attractions were manufactured by the firm Attraction, who were responsible for the construction of many of the amusement parks which remain to be seen around the former Soviet Union today in various states of repair. Located northwest to the Palace of Culture in the center of Pripyat, the park had 5 attractions: the iconic 26-meter Ferris wheel titled Circular Overview, the Autodrome bumper cars, a paratrooper ride called Chamomile, Russian swing boats, and also a carnival shooting game. Fun fact, the successor to the original company is still manufacturing the Ferris wheel, paratrooper, and bumper cars with a similar design as of 2017. Radiation levels around the park vary. The liquidators washed radiation into the soil after the helicopters carrying radioactive materials used the grounds as a landing strip, so concrete areas are less radioactive. However, areas where moss is built up can emit levels amongst the highest levels of radiation in the whole area. So the Ferris wheel actually made news in September of 2017 when Polish tourists turned it mechanically for the first time since 1986, later returning it to its original position. As much as it would be fascinating to explore history, I'll wait till it's a little less detrimental to my health. Number 4. The Paris Catacombs. Deep underground the city of Paris are hundreds of miles of tunnels in a complex network that is one of the oldest in the world. It's a darker city that few tourists experience due to the high risk of danger. People often get lost. The walls can also collapse at any moment, so many who venture there wear miner's helmets. There's no electricity among the endless winding canals. There's no electricity amongst the endless winding canals, corridors, and crypts filled with mounds of unidentified skulls, which are estimated to be about 6 million deceased Parisians. There are parts so tight that you have to lie on your belly and slither forward like a worm to get through. Only a small section of the catacombs is accessible to tourists, while the rest has been illegal to enter since 1955. Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't explore the tourist accessible areas. Heck, I want to visit those myself, but stay out of the illegal areas. Urban explorers who frequent the catacombs call themselves cataphiles, which I must admit is a very smart moniker. They paint, sculpt, and create other art, while also building false walls, trap doors, and secret chutes to keep away the cataflics or catacops who try to catch them trespassing. You must know a cataphile who can be your guide to even try to explore the unknown, or else risk getting lost or stuck for who knows how long. As much as I love exploring creepy history, the thought of getting lost in such a cursed place is a type of scared I'm not fond of, and don't particularly ever want to experience.
In at number 3, Aniva Rock Lighthouse, Russia. The Aniva Lighthouse was built by the Japanese in 1939 on a chunk of rock off the southern coast of Sakhalin just east of Russia. The island was largely uninhabited until the 1800s when both Japan and Russia became interested in annexing it. A ring of lighthouses were built on Sakhalin's rocky coast to signal incoming troop carriers and merchant ships. After around 50 years of sharing the island, the Russians annexed it all in the Second World War, causing 500,000 Japanese to be evacuated back to Hokkaido. In 1951, the Treaty of San Francisco was signed, officially handing tenure over to the Russians. Now the Aniva Lighthouse is abandoned, including its 7 stories of diesel engines, accumulator rooms, keepers' living spaces, radio facilities, storerooms, large clockwork pendulum, and 300 kg pool of mercury. The place now looks like the perfect location for a horror movie, with the building completely deteriorating upon the rock due to the force of the water and wind. However, if you want to visit, you can. Regular tours are organized from Sakhalin's main city. During the 6-day journey, tourists can not only visit the lighthouse but also enjoy the views of the city. Coming in at number 2, Willard Asylum, New York. The Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane is a former state hospital in Willard, New York near Seneca Lake. The asylum was originally meant to rescue mentally ill people from county facilities where they were typically kept, often chained up or in cages. At Willard, the idea was that patients could be treated and hopefully rejoin society. In reality, Willard was more of a prison than it was a hospital, with patients being kept until the administrators decided they could leave. However, many never did. Worse still, not everyone who found themselves in the asylum were actually insane. Now, as of today, Willard is abandoned, but much of it still remains. The bowling alley built inside its walls during the later years is still standing, with several decaying pins remaining at the end of the lanes. The morgue is also still intact, with the autopsy tables in place next to the drawers where the bodies were stored. Now, in those days when a person died, it was shameful to have one's family name on the grave of a mental hospital Hospital. As such, out of respect, none of the graves were marked. Today, efforts are underway to find out who is buried in the graves and replace numbers with names. In the attic is where things have been unearthed though. In 1995, the same year the asylum closed, hundreds of suitcases were discovered in the attic. They had been left behind by the patients who never left the asylum. More than half of the 50,000 patients that came to Willard died within its walls, making this building one of the scariest in history. And finally, coming in at number 1, Pripyat, the Chernobyl abandoned city. Yes, we're discussing an entire city with this one, not just one specific building, because honestly there are way too many. Pripyat is a ghost city in northern Ukraine, near the Ukraine-Belarus border. The city was founded on February 4th, 1970 as the 9th nuclear city in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of 49,360 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27, 1986, the day after the Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the number 4 nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of the Ukrainian SSR. It is to this day considered the worst nuclear disaster in history and is one of only 2 nuclear energy disasters rated at 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The accident began during a safety test on an RBMK-type nuclear reactor, which was commonly used throughout the Soviet Union. During this test, a large amount of energy was suddenly released, vaporizing superheated cooling water and rupturing the reactor core in a highly destructive steam explosion. This was immediately followed by an open-air reactor core fire that released considerable airborne radioactive contamination for about 9 days that precipitated onto parts of the USSR and Western Europe before finally being contained on May 4th, 1986. Due to the radiation left behind, the entire city was evacuated, and all that remains are the abandoned buildings and a haunting Ferris wheel standing motionless in time. It had been scheduled to have its official opening 5 days after the disaster, in time for May Day celebrations. The Azure swimming pool and Avanhard Stadium are 2 other popular tourist attractions. You can only stay there 2 hours, otherwise you'd
Number 5, the Mary Celeste. Probably the most famous mystery ship on our list today is the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that was found drifting in December of 1872 off of the Azores with her crew of 10 nowhere to be found. The Canadian brigantine De Gratia found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition under partial sail and with her lifeboat missing. There were also signs that something had gone wrong. To be specific, one of its pumps was dismantled, but once again, that ship was still seaworthy, and there was no hint as to why the crew and passengers had abandoned it. The last entry in her log was dated around 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th and was still amply provisioned when found. Her cargo of alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board were ever seen or heard from ever again. Among the missing was the captain, his wife, and their very young daughter. On December 23rd of 1872, during a court hearing to try and establish just what happened, Frederick Soliflude, who was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, ordered an examination of the Mary Celeste, which was carried out by John Austin, surveyor of shipping, with the assistance of a diver, Ricardo Fortunato. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow, caused by a sharp instrument, and found possible traces of scarlet fluid on the captain's sword. His report emphasized that the ship did not appear to have been struck by heavy weather, citing a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in its place. Now, Austin did not acknowledge that the vial might have been replaced since the abandonment, nor did the court raise this point. Fortunato's report on the hull concluded that the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. A further inspection by a group of Royal Naval captains endorsed Austin's opinion that the cuts on the bow had been caused deliberately. They also discovered stains on one of the ship's rails that might have been bodily fluids, together with a deep mark possibly caused by an axe. These findings strengthened Flood's suspicions that human wrongdoing, rather than natural disaster, was the cause for the mystery. On January 22nd of 1873, he sent the reports to the Board of Trade in London, adding his own conclusion that the crew had gotten at the alcohol on board and, killed the Briggs family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They had cut the bows to simulate a collision and then fled in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. Flood thought that Morehouse and his men were hiding something, specifically that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and that the log had been doctored. He just couldn't accept that the Mary Celeste could have been traveled so far, uncrewed. Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, helped make the ship famous with a short story vaguely based on the event, in which foul play explains the enigma. A 2007 theory, reported by the Smithsonian, suggests that perhaps the captain made the call to abandon ship in sight of land after the ship's pumps became fouled. Normally, it would be unusual for a captain to abandon a seaworthy vessel, but the captain may not have been able to tell just how much water the ship was taking on with the pumps broken. The ship was also slightly off course and had been battling bad weather, which may have prompted the captain to take the chance at land when he could. To this day, the crew of the mysterious vessel was never found. Also, despite many theories, no one can say with any certainty why the ship was abandoned. The Mary Celeste sailed for 12 years after it was abandoned, and finally struck the Rochelle Reef off of the coast of Haiti and became stuck there. And it's still there. It was discovered in 2001. Let me know what your theory is in the comments. Number 4, the Carroll A. Deering. This ship was built in Bath, Maine in 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company for commercial use. One of the last large commercial sailing vessels, the ship was designed to carry cargo and had been in service for a year when it began its final voyage to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So the cargo ship and its 10-man crew successfully made it to Rio de Janeiro in 1920, despite needing to change captains when its original one fell ill, but something strange happened on its way back to Virginia. A lightship keeper in North Carolina said a crewman who didn't seem very officer-like reported the ship had lost its anchors while the rest of the crew was milling about suspiciously. The ship was still in good condition when it was spotted from Cape Hatteras on January 31st of 1921 before it was torn apart on the Diamond Shoals. Another ship spotted the Carroll A. Deering near Outer Banks the next day in an area that would have been a strange course for a ship on its way to Norfolk, Virginia. Now, if someone wants to fight me on that pronunciation, I swear I consulted a couple of friends who live in Virginia for that one. The following day, a shipwreck was spotted, but dangerous conditions kept investigators away for 4 days. When they went aboard, eventually, they found food laid out as if they were getting ready for a meal, but the crew's personal belongings and the lifeboats were gone. So, what happened to the captain and crew? All 12 men were missing in action, with no idea what the heck could have transpired. A month after the Coast Guard began investigating the Carroll A. Deering, a new theory was formed related to the disappearance of another vessel, the Hewitt, around, the same time. The Hewitt was making its way from Sabine, Texas to Portland, Maine, carrying a cargo of sulfur when it sent its last message on January 25th off of the coast of Florida. When the vessel never arrived in Boston where it was expected on January 29th, a search began. The Hewitt and her crew had also disappeared without a trace, and the popular theory questioned if the ships could have collided. But the lack of oars, life preservers, or other floating wreckage disproves the idea. But 58 men were now lost. In April of 1921, a message in a bottle found by a man on the North Carolina coast seemed to give the answer to the mystery. Deering captured by oil-burning boat, the note read. Now, the State Department began an investigation into the Deering and several other ships, and it was suspected that the Deering had been captured by pirates. Arrgh. Then the newspapers began reporting the possibility of a Bolshevik plot to steal the ships, cargo, and crews and somehow whisk them all away to Russian ports. By September, however, it was discovered that the message found in the bottle, the only real evidence of what may have happened to the crew, was in fact written by the man who supposedly found it. Mr. Christopher Columbus Gray faked the note in the hopes that he could discredit the staff at the Cape Hatteras lighthouse and take someone's job. It's a dramatic way to get a job, but hey, whatever works. The hoax had prompted investigations by the US Navy, Treasury, State Department, Department of Commerce, and Department of Justice. Without the note, however, the investigations fizzled out and ended without an official explanation. The federal government has followed numerous leads on pirates, mutinies, and more, but they've got nothing. So do I. Number 3, the island of Poveglia. Yep, an entirely abandoned island, and it's got quite the history. So the island is located in the lagoon near Venice, and is famous for being one of the most haunted places in all of Italy. Tourists and locals alike are banned from the island, which was used for centuries as a place to exile the sick, to prevent the spread of disease, and contain the mentally ill in an asylum built in the late 1800s. Yeah, I'll backtrack and elaborate. In 1348, the bubonic plague arrived in Venice and Poveglia, like many other small islands at the time, and it became a quarantine colony. The plague on average killed 1 out of 3 Europeans, so fearing the crazy spread of the disease, Venice exiled many of its symptom-bearing citizens there. Go! At the island center, the dead and those too sick to protest were burned on giant pyres. This included the tens of thousands of Venice citizens dying on the mainland. These fires were burned once more in 1630 when the Black Death again swept through the city. A small island was used as a mass burial ground, and ashes from human remains make up as much as 50% of the island's soil, so I hope it's a good fertilizer. The deaths of nearly 160,000 people on the island have given it its nickname, the Island of Ghosts. A doctor at the asylum was known to have experimented on patients with crude lobotomies and jumped from the bell tower in the 1930s after claiming he'd been driven mad by ghosts. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. A report titled Haunted History states that some restoration work has started in recent history, but abruptly stopped without explanation, so maybe this is one spot on today's list that I don't want to visit, like, ever. Number 2, Bodie State Historic Park. Formerly a genuine gold mining town located east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in Mono County, California, and now a national landmark, it is known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the world. It is named after W.S. Bodie, first name unknown, but rumored to be either William or Waterman, who discovered gold in 1859 in an area now known as Brody Bluff. He tragically passed away in a snowstorm that same winter and was never present for what came to be. According to pioneer Judge McClinton, the district's name was changed from the proper spelling of B-O-D-E-Y to B-O-D-Y, and then a few other phonetic variations to eventually B-O-D-I-E after a painter in the nearby boomtown of Aurora later-day signed as such, an accidental typo that got stuck through history, which is a good reminder to proofread your work. While the output from the mine is largely insignificant in terms of mining history, the violence and early endings to lives tell a different story. A particularly harsh winter between 1878 and 79 claimed hundreds of lives, with many others perishing from falling timber and explosions underground. Bodie as a town grew to have a reputation for violence and lawlessness, and unlike other mining camps at the time, killings were daily events. Robberies, stage holdups, and fights happened at such a frequency that no complete record could be kept. Reverend F.M. Warrington would describe the area in 1881 as a sea of sin, lashed by tempests of lust and passion. The first of 4 mysterious fires tore through the business district in 1892, the next destroying the town mill in 1912, and another destroying the same mill again in 1898. The last of the unknown fires demolished most of what was left of the now ghost town in 1932, taking many lives too soon in the process. When the last producing mine shut down after 1945, very few people were left living in what was left of the town, and all eventually met untimely ends. One man shot his wife unprompted, and 3 other men from the town took it upon themselves to take his life for the act. According to historians, the ghost of that man would visit the 3 men after his passing, shaking his fist and appearing as if he was cursing them out. Those men soon died of mysterious diseases and illnesses. Visitors to the area have reported meeting spirits that leave them feeling suffocated, seeing doors open and close on their own, and rocking chairs that may or may not have a menacing older lady staring them down, or even the empty chair rocking on its own. Nowadays, if you remove anything from the land, even like a little pebble, you'll be cursed with remorse and tragedy. The curse is upheld by the ghosts of residents past, who guard against thieves and protect the town's treasures. So kleptos, steer clear or be cursed. Number 1, Plymouth. The Caribbean island of Montserrat was quite the getaway spot in the 1980s after music producer Sir George Martin opened a recording studio there called Air. The appeal of working with his team and spending a few weeks or months recording in a tropical paradise was so compelling that the world's most famous rock stars, had a good time there. We're talking like Mick Jagger, Elton John, Stevie Wonder, and Paul McCartney all laid down tracks. The party sadly ended abruptly when twin disasters struck the island. Beginning on the 18th of July in 1995, a series of huge eruptions at the South Friar Hills volcano, which had been inactive for centuries, sent pyroclastic flows and ash falls across a wide area of southern Montserrat, including the capital of Plymouth. On the 21st of August in 1995, tephra fell on Plymouth, necessitating an evacuation that lasted until September 3rd. Following renewed volcanic activity on the 1st of December, residents were evacuated for the second time, but were allowed back on the 1st of January. On April 3rd, it was evacuated for the third and final time. The island was divided into risk zones. During some periods, entry into Plymouth was prohibited, and at other times it was allowed during daytime only to those with the means of rapid escape. And the last time that access was legally allowed to the area during daytime was June 16th of 1997, which was right before I was born. On the 25th of June, a further massive eruption produced pyroclastic surges that killed 19 people and reached nearly to the island's airport on the eastern side of the island, which had remained open until that time. Between the 4th to the 8th of August of that year, a further series of large eruptions destroyed approximately 80% of the town, burying it under 1.4 meters of ash. This hot material burned many of the buildings, making habitation nearly impossible for many of the residents. The flows, lava, ash, and other volcanic volcanic rock types were mostly compact, having a density similar to that of concrete. The removal of the overburden would have required the use of explosives, bulldozers, and other resources way too expensive for all of this. It was anticipated that the soil underneath the hardened mud and lava would have been scorched and left completely non-arable by the intense heat of the pyroclastic flows. The entire south half of the island was declared an exclusion zone because of the continuing volcanic activity at the hills. So the government of the island was moved north to the town of Brady's, although Plymouth still remains the technical capital. Recently, Montserrat has begun chaperoning driving tours into the exclusion zone, where visitors can walk through the ruins of the former capital, which now lies buried under some 20 feet of ash and stone, where the smoking volcano still pumps over 350 tons of sulfur dioxide into the sky every day. During a tour, one sees modern concrete buildings shattered by the unbelievable force of nature. Over 10 feet of ash and mud have buried so much of the city that in certain areas only rooftops poke up from the dust. We're talking like papers and envelopes are stacked on desktop piles of work, which were made pointless by the pile of ash that fills up the floor and outside balconies. 19 people died from breaking the law and entering the exclusion zone before it was safe, by the way. The hot gas cooked their lungs, and they looked similar to mummies when they were eventually found. Yeah. In fifth place, we have Isla de las Muñecas, Mexico. Decided to kick off today by being an overachiever. This is an entire abandoned island. The island of the dolls in Mexico is like something straight out of a horror movie, but my kind of horror movie. Located on Texuelo Lake, it is home to hundreds of hanging, slowly decaying dolls, thanks to a man named Don Julian Santana. Over 50 years ago, Don Santana left his wife and child and moved onto an island on Texuelo Lake in the Xochimilicos canals. According to him, a young girl actually drowned in the lake in the 1950s, and Don Julian Santana devoted his life to honoring this lost soul by collecting and hanging up dolls by the hundreds. Eventually, he transformed the entire island into a doll-infested wonderland. Now, he began collecting lost dolls from the canals and the trash near his island home. He's also said to have traded produce he grew to locals for more dolls. Don didn't really clean up the dolls or attempt to fix them, but he rather put them up with missing eyes and limbs, covered in dirt, and generally in whatever ramshackle state he found them in. Even when dolls arrived in good shape, the wind and weather turned them into cracked and distorted versions of themselves. Don also kept his cabin filled with the dolls, which he dressed in headdresses, sunglasses, and other various accessories. Despite the fact that most people found the island frightening, Don saw the dolls as beautiful protectors, and he welcomed visitors, whom he would, show around, charging a small fee for taking photos. In 2001, Don Santana was found drowned in the same area in which he believed that small child had passed away. According to legend, the dolls in the island are haunted by the spirits of the dead girl, and perhaps even by Don himself. Okay, who wants to go on a road trip with me? Anyone?
Oh, thanks.
In fourth place, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. So Pripyat is an abandoned city in northern Ukraine located near the border with Belarus. Named after the nearby river of the same name, it was founded on February 4th of 1970 as the 9th Atomgrad, which was a type of closed town in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was located in the adjacent ghost city of Chernobyl. So Pripyat was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of around 49,000 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27th of 1986, one day after the Chernobyl disaster, making it younger as a city at that time than I am now. Although it was located within the administrative district of Ivankiv Rayon, the abandoned municipality now has a status of City of Regional Significance within the larger Kyiv Oblast and is administered directly from the capital of Kyiv. Pripyat is also supervised by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, which manages activities for the entire Chernobyl exclusion zone. So following the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the entire population of Pripyat was moved to the purpose-built city of Slavutich. At the time of the evacuation, the average age of residents was about 26 years old, and the city housed 13,414 apartments in 160 apartment blocks, with 18 halls of residence accommodating up to, let's say, 7,600 single males or females, and 8 halls of residence for married couples. In terms of education, there were 15 kindergartens and elementary schools for 4,980 children, each with their own nickname, and 5 secondary schools for about 6,000 students. In 2019, it was announced that folks could start visiting the affected areas if certain health and safety procedures were followed, but I don't feel like visiting a radiation-affected city is high up on my bucket list at this point in time. Number 3, the Octavius. The cargo ship Octavius met its demise in 1761 after leaving China and setting sail for Britain via the North Northwest Passage. At that time, no ship had ever successfully navigated the passage, and the Octavius disappeared, proving it was no exception. A whaling ship discovered the damaged remains of Octavius on October 11th of 1775 and boarded it to look for survivors and cargo. When the men ventured into the below-deck quarters, they found the ship's captain frozen at his desk, partway through filling out the ship's log, and the rest of the crew were similarly encased in ice throughout their rooms. Brr. The whalers snatched up the ship log and fled the Octavius, leaving behind all, including the first and last entries, which were stuck to the desk. The log revealed that the Arctic temperatures and ice captured the Octavius around 250 miles from Barrow, where all those aboard perished on November 11th of 1762. The whalers, however, found the boat near Greenland, meaning it somehow made its way through the Northwest Passage, even with its crew frozen solid. Look, while Frozen might not be my favorite Disney movie ever, did anyone think to check in with Elsa or any of her ancestors? This just seems like a magical accident that could easily be undone. I'm just saying. Number 2, the MV Joyita. This ship was a 70-foot luxury yacht built in Los Angeles in the United States and launched in 1931. Roland West, who was a famous Hollywood director in the 1920s and 30s, was the first owner of the ship, naming it after his wife, Jewel Carmenil, calling the ship Joyita, which means little jewel in Spanish. The ship spent much of the 1930s cruising the west coast of the United States under both Roland West and its subsequent owner, Milton Beacon. It became a Pacific patrol boat during the Second World War, patrolling the seas around Hawaii. Although she sustained minor damage after running aground and had some of her components replaced with lower quality materials, she remained largely intact and in good shape after the end of the war, and by the 1950s was being used as a fishing charter vessel. On October 3rd of 1955, the ship left Apia in Samoa to sail to the Tokolo Island, a journey of about 270 miles. Only one of her 2 engines was running due to equipment failure at the last minute, but the journey was considered safe given its short distance and the favorable weather conditions. So it was carrying medical supplies and wooden construction materials on board and had no dangerous cargo. She also carried 25 people, 16 crew, and 9 passengers, and the journey was expected to last around 48 hours. The ship was reported as overdue 3 days later, and no distress calls had been received. Flying boats from the New Zealand Air Force patrolled the same area that it was thought to be in for almost a week, covering a huge area of open water, but found nothing. Finally, almost 5 weeks later, on November 10th, the merchant ship Tuvalu, traveling to the Funafuti Atoll more than 600 miles to the west, saw a ship drifting ahead of them. The ship did not respond to hails from Tuvalu, and the captain decided to investigate further. Investigation showed that the ship was empty. The crew and passengers were missing, and tons of cargo from the ship was lost. So while the ship itself was perfectly fine and in no danger of sinking, there was some evidence that something had happened on board. Parts of the bridge and accompanying rooms above the waterline had been damaged, and there was broken glass inside. In addition, stained bandages were found on deck, along with a doctor's medical bag. The one working engine was found covered in mattresses, but with sufficient fuel for it to operate, and the second engine was still partially disassembled and therefore non-functional. And all the clocks on board were found to have stopped at the exact same time, 10:25 p.m. Rather spooky. The communications radio was turned to 2182 kHz, an internationally recognized distress frequency. However, the radio itself was found to not work and was not broadcasting, something which may not have been obvious to the crew. Oh, and all of the lifeboats were missing. Some of the story about what happened on the Joyita can be pieced together from what was found by the official maritime inquiry. Like, for example, it's clear what had caused the initial problems on the ship. A corroded pipe, one of those replaced during the Second World War, was found to be leaking, and this allowed water to enter into the hull. It is very unlikely that the crew would have been able to find the source of the leak in open water. The damage to the superstructure of the vessel seemed to be unconnected to the problems they were experiencing, but may have added to the sense that the vessel was heavily damaged. The attempts to send out a distress signal and the lack of response may have led to a rising panic amongst those on board. The fact that whatever had happened had occurred at night also may have led to a lack of situational awareness, as the damage found was minor and would have been clearly recognized as such in the daytime. However, the decision to abandon the ship, if that's what happened, makes absolutely no sense. The 3 lifeboats were far less seaworthy than the ship herself, and there were insufficient life jackets for everyone on board. Furthermore, the vessel itself was perfectly buoyant even 5 weeks later, and the captain would have been experienced enough to recognize this. So while it seems that those on board decided to, leave the safety of the ship in the night and test their luck in tiny rafts, why they did this is a total mystery. Theories range from pirates, once again, to a mutiny amongst those on ship. The crew were never seen again, and this means that 25 people met their end somehow. Furthermore, despite the damage, there was no evidence of violence apart from the bandages, and these themselves suggest there was enough time for someone to administer medical assistance. No trace was ever found of the crew or the life rafts. And what caused them to abandon ship in the dark, only 50 miles short of their destination, remains a mystery to this day. Number 1, the SV Kaz II. So this is the most recent entry in our list, and it was found adrift 88 miles off of the coast of Australia, near the Great Barrier Reef, just 5 days after it set sail from Airlie Beach towards Townsville, Queensland in April of 2007. According to the investigation reports, it was sailing with a 3-person crew who were not experienced sailors. However, what happened to them remains a mystery to this day. Many believe rough weather conditions could be a reason. Others blame, pirates or even communists for the same. The vessel was found in perfect condition, except for the one sail, which had been shredded to pieces, and the 3 men were never discovered. According to investigators, they might have drowned while trying to untangle a fishing lure caught in the vessel's rudder, but others believe that a sea monster could have swallowed them.
Number 5 on this list is Atlantis Marine Park. We are headed all the way down under for this one because Atlantis Marine Park is actually in Australia. AustralianNews.com writes, Atlantis Marine Park was initially a huge success with families from WA and beyond flocking to the park to watch the live dolphin shows, swim in the pools, ride pedal boats, and have their obligatory photo with King Neptune, a huge statue at the entrance to the park. However, in 1990, just 9 years after opening, Atlantis shut its doors. Western Australia's boom never eventuated, and the 1987 stock market crash put a halt to prosperity. Atlantis closed due to financial difficulty and was left abandoned. It has since been damaged by vandals and has become overgrown and derelict. Old statues can still be found scattered throughout the grounds, as well as broken walls and concrete pools. For years, it was no man's land, popular with dog walkers. However, just last month, the iconic King Neptune was restored to its former glory after a petition by locals who started an online campaign for something to be done with the ruins. Well, I'm glad to see that Neptune is looking fresh again, but I don't know how long he'll stay that way. Apparently, this place, when the sun goes down, is home to some evil creatures. Four-legged mutant things with glowing red eyes that hiss and are nothing that we know of from this world. Now, this could be a bunch of baloney, but that's what some people have reported seeing when they've explored this place at night. Probably safe to go during the daytime, just make sure you set an alarm for 6 p.m. to get out of there if you do go. Number 4 on this list is Crinkly Bottom Theme Park. This one, to my understanding, has been demolished, but it still deserves a spot on this list because of how creepy it was when it was around. Mr. Blobby was a TV caricature in the early 1990s. He was featured on one of Britain's most successful late-night Saturday television shows and was this big pink blob creature with a bow tie on. This was a comedy television show, and this blob thing didn't lack any of that. He would often engage in annoying antics with celebrity guests and become a bit of a British television phenomenon. Well, Mr. Blobby was successful enough that he of course needed toys, merchandise, and heck, while we're at it, let's give him his own amusement park. Sometimes what works well on TV doesn't always translate to a fun amusement park though. Crinkly Bottom was what they called it, and it opened up in 1994. This annoying sidekick's popularity didn't last forever though, and this amusement park's life was very short-lived. The place shut down in 1996 because it simply was not making enough money. Then it faded away into obscurity and everybody forgot about this interesting little business venture. That was until 2009 though, when some urban explorers stumbled upon it again. The once bright and beautiful Blobby Land looked like something straight out of a horror film. It was worn and gross and just reeked of evil. Animals had taken up residence there, and based on how the place looked, it wouldn't have been surprising if some sketchy characters once did business there too. You can't visit it now because it's demolished, but you really shouldn't have been going when it was around anyways.
In third place, time to visit the Bodie State Historic Park. So formerly a genuine gold mining town, located east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in Mono County, California, and now a national landmark, it is known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the world. It is named after W.S. Bodie, first name unknown, but rumored to be either William or Waterman, who discovered gold in 1859 in an area now known as Brody Bluff. He tragically passed in a snowstorm that same winter and was never present for what came to be. According to pioneer Judge McClinton, the district's name was changed from the proper spelling of B-O-D-E-Y to B-O-D-Y, and then a few other phonetic variations to eventually B-O-D-I-E, after a painter in the nearby boomtown of Aurora lettered a sign as such. An accidental typo that stuck through history, which is a good reminder to proofread your work. I don't do it enough. While the output from the mine is largely insignificant in terms of mining history, the violence and early endings to lives tell a different story. And a particularly harsh winter between 1878 and 79 claimed hundreds of lives, with many others perishing from falling timbers and explosions underground. So Bodie as a town grew to have a reputation for violence and lawlessness. And unlike other mining camps at the time, killings were daily events. Robberies, stage holdups, and fights happened at such a frequency that no complete record could be kept. Reverend F.M. Warrington would describe the area in 1881 as a sea of sin, lashed by the tempests of lust and passion. The first of 4 mysterious fires tore through the business district in 1892, the next destroying the town mill in 1912, and another destroying the same mill again in 1898. The last of the unknown fires demolished most of what was left of the now ghost town in 1932, taking many lives way too soon in the process. So when the last producing mine shut down after 1945, very few people were left living in what was left of the town, and all eventually met untimely ends. One man shot his wife unprompted, and 3 other men from the town took it upon themselves to take his life for that act. So according to historians, the ghost of that man would visit the 3 men after his passing, shaking his fist and appearing as if he was cursing them out. Those men soon died of mysterious diseases and illnesses. Visitors to the area have reported meeting spirits that leave them feeling suffocated, seeing doors open and close on their own, and rocking chairs that may or may not have a menacing older lady staring them down, or even the empty chair rocking on its own. Though Bodie might be a bit of a tourist destination nowadays, but if you remove anything from the land, like I'm talking like a pebble, you'll be cursed with remorse and tragedy. The park keeps a logbook of all letters and items returned to them, with each thief writing an apology note to Bodie for what was taken. The curse is upheld by the ghosts of residents past who guard against thieves and protect the town's treasures. Okay, so kleptos, steer clear or be cursed. In second place, we have the island of Poveglia. Yep, another entire abandoned island. This one's a little creepier though. So the island is located in the lagoon near Venice and is famous for being one of the most haunted places in Italy. Tourists and locals alike are banned from the island, which was used for centuries as a place to exile the sick to prevent the spread of disease and contain the mentally ill in an asylum built in the late 1800s. Yes, I'll backtrack and elaborate. So in 1348, the bubonic plague arrived in Venice and Poveglia, like many other small islands at the time, and it became a quarantine colony. The plague on average killed like 1 out of 3 Europeans, by the way. So fearing the unbridled spread of the disease, Venice exiled many of its symptom-bearing citizens there. So at the island center, the dead and those too sick to protest were burned on giant pyres. So this included the tens of thousands of Venice citizens just dying on the mainland. Those fires would burn once more in 1630 when the Black Death again swept through the city. The small island was used as a mass burial ground, and ashes from human remains make up as much as 50% of the island's soil. Cripes, I hope it's a good fertilizer. The deaths of nearly 160,000 people on the island have given it its nickname, the Island of Ghosts. A doctor at the asylum was known to have experimented on patients with crude lobotomies and jumped from the bell tower in the late 1930s after claiming he had been driven mad by ghosts. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. A report titled Haunted History states that some restoration work had started in recent history but abruptly stopped without explanation. Okay, maybe this is one spot on today's list that I might not want to visit. And in first place, we have St. Elmo in Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town and allegedly the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, while also boasting the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. The town was a major gold and silver trading center and hub of life for many pioneers, outlaws, and miners for decades. So it was originally called Forest City, but St. Elmo was settled in 1878 and became an official township in 1880 with the arrival of the first post office. So the residents of the town were forced to change the name because there were already too many forest cities in the area. So gotta applaud the originality. St. Elmo went through a massive gold rush, reaching the height of its population of 2,000 residents in only 10 days. The majority of the town worked in one of the 4 local mines. The Mary Murphy mine was the most profitable mine and the longest operating, having produced over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. When the mines began to close down, the town began to dwindle. The Mary Murphy mine continued to operate until 1922, but was shut down when the railroad was abandoned. Postal service was discontinued in 1952 after the death of St. Elmo's postmaster. Now for the fun part, ghost stories. I saved the best for last for a reason. The most famous ghost of St. Elmo is Annabelle Dirty Annie Stark, not to be confused with the beloved Annabelle doll. This Annabelle is the descendant of Anton and Anna Stark, who arrived in St. Elmo with the Pacific Railroad in 1881. Anton was a section boss in the mines, while Anna ran the Home Comfort Hotel located on Poplar Street and the general store. Oh, and both structures are still standing today. Anna Stark was known as a cruel and harsh woman who never allowed her 3 children, Roy, Tony, and Annabelle, out in the town to mingle or work alongside alongside what she deemed the simple town folk. Annabelle grew up attractive and passionate for the town, and her love of St. Elmo was fierce. After the death of her mother, Annabelle and Tony inherited the hotel, and the once impeccably clean establishment fell to shambles. So along with the decline of the town, Annabelle began to lose her grasp on reality. The town soon called her Dirty Annie because she would emerge in filthy clothing and her hair was in a tangled mess all the time. Finally, free of the harsh rule of her mother, most people assumed this was her quiet rebellion. Residents remember strolling the main street with her firearm loaded and hung over one shoulder, ready to protect the town from anyone who dared to threaten it. Since her death, it is told she can still be found roaming the streets. Only a short while after Annabelle had passed away, the hotel was left to a family friend whose grandchildren were playing inside the hotel, when suddenly all of the doors slammed shut and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The children cried and screamed, and finally the room returned to the outside temperature, and the door slowly swung open. Oh, that's not the only ghost story. Don't worry. A woman skiing down Poplar Street at dusk was struck by a peculiar sight of a lovely-looking woman in a long white gown glaring out of the second-story window of the Home Comfort Hotel. Now, the skier was shocked. She knew the owner of the hotel was on vacation, and nobody was supposed to be inside. As she turned to see what the woman was eyeing, she noticed snowmobiles approaching. So, sidebar, snowmobiling is illegal in St. Elmo, so the skier went and advised the group, who promptly apologized and went back where they came from. When she turned back to look at the hotel, the woman in the window was still watching, and she lowered her head, nodded at the skier, turned and vanished before her eyes. So curious and in disbelief, the skier went back the next day to find every window and door were locked. When the owner of the hotel returned, the two women searched the property with nothing to be found. So was it Annabelle keeping watch?
Number 5. Whittingham Hospital, England. Whittingham Hospital, located in England, is notorious for its spine-chilling reputation as one of the most haunted places within the United Kingdom. This branching psychiatric facility was originally founded in 1869 as the Whittingham Asylum. The hospital is riddled with a long and dark history that continues to intrigue the curious minds of paranormal enthusiasts, dark tourists, and even just casual onlookers. The hospital was meant to be a place of hope, where those suffering from mental illnesses could seek treatment and solace. But over the years, Whittingham Hospital's reputation took a dark turn. Substantiated claims of overcrowding, inadequate care, and the mistreatment of struggling patients began to surface, casting a dark shadow over the institution. As the hospital's population inflated, the claims and stories of its dark side only grew. One of the most haunting aspects of Whittingham Hospital comes from its now abandoned state. The facility officially closed its doors in 1995. The large complex consists of many interconnected buildings, all of which are said to be riddled with bouts of paranormal activity. It's not uncommon for curious visitors to report odd encounters, strange noises, and unexplained phenomena within the hospital's halls. One of the most famous ghostly entities said to roam the hospital is that of a nurse known as Nurse Edith. According to legend, Nurse Edith was deeply committed to her patients and worked tirelessly during her time at Whittingham. Some believe that her spirit lingers in the hospital, continuing to care for the patients who suffered there, even in their afterlives. Aw, that's kind of sweet. Visitors have reported hearing the sound of airy footsteps and the rustling of a nurse's uniform, even though the building is completely void of the living. Another ghost associated with Whittingham Hospital is the Lady in White, and guys, I'm starting to think that this Lady in White is actually just everywhere, because I swear to the heavens almighty that she has appeared in every single ghost video I've done. Is she like a ghost celebrity? Is she going on a world tour? Are people just really not creative and the only name they can think of is the lady and a vague descriptive feature? What would I be called? The lady with curls? Sorry, anyway. The Lady in White. This Lady in White is described as a spectral woman dressed in a flowing white gown. Well, I would assume so. She's often seen wandering the hospital's halls, her presence accompanied by an eerie chill and an overwhelming sense of dread. Some speculate that she may have been a former patient or a nurse from this hospital's dark past. What nurse was going to work in a long, flowy dress? The hospital's small chapel is another location that is thought to be haunted. It's always the chapel, isn't it? Witnesses have reported hearing faint whispers, disembodied voices, and the sound of organ music emanating from the chapel, even though it hasn't been used for decades. Well, not by the living at least. The atmosphere in this abandoned place is incredibly uncomfortable and haunting. It's not surprising in the slightest that many believe the spirits of the past still linger within its walls. Number 4. Essex County Hospital. Essex County Hospital is a medical facility in the heart of Essex County, but it has definitely gained popularity for more than just its dark medical practices. This now abandoned hospital has become the subject of numerous ghost stories and paranormal legends, earning it a reputation as one of the most haunted asylums in the region. The hospital's strange history began in the late 1800s, when it was first founded as a state-of-the-art mental health institution. Over the years, it grew to care for a wide range of patients, from the mentally ill to those with severe physical medical conditions. However, However, it is the alleged treatment of the mentally ill patients that left a sinister imprint on this building's hallowed halls. Many claims of paranormal sightings in Essex County Hospital revolve around the abandoned psychiatric wards. Former staff members and visitors claim to hear disembodied voices, eerie whispers, and the sounds of footsteps echoing boldly through the empty hallways. Some witnesses have even reported shadowy figures moving about, only to vanish into thin air when approached. These strange entities are thought to be tormented souls, leading some to believe that the hospital's troubled history has left broken, lingering spirits behind. One of the most chilling stories surrounds a former nurse who is said to still roam the hospital's near-empty corridors. It's said that she was driven to madness by the relentless demands of her job and eventually took her own life during one of her regular shifts. Visitors and paranormal investigators have even reported encountering her ghostly figure, dressed in an old nurse's uniform, wandering aimlessly and emitting an energy plagued by sorrow. The morgue of the hospital is another area where paranormal activity is frequently reported. Witnesses have claimed to hear strange, unexplained noises and have also felt sudden drops in temperatures. Some have even reported seeing figures of patients who passed away within the hospital's walls wandering around. Essex County Hospital's notoriety has attracted paranormal investigators from everywhere. Many have conducted extensive research within the building, managing to capture unexplained phenomena on audio and video recordings. Legends and ghost stories have only intensified the hospital's supernatural reputation. Residents avoid the area at night, and honestly, props to them, they're smart. Don't walk near the creepy abandoned hospital filled with scorned creatures alone at night. Night is when the bad things happen. Night is when there is definitely something chasing you as you run up the stairs after turning off the light. Skeptics often scoff at the claims of ghostly encounters, but the giant volume of reported paranormal activity can't be ignored. Whether you're a plain-minded skeptic or a curious believer in the supernatural, the stories surrounding this abandoned hospital continue to intrigue anyone who hears its unsettling story.
Number 3 on this list is Boblo Island. I had to include Boblo Island on this list to give a bit of a shout out to Ontario, where your boy grew up. Boblo Island was wildly successful for a time and operated for nearly a century. As with a lot of places on this list though, it couldn't seem to power through the 90s and had to shut down. Reader's Digest says, picture an 1898 Victorian amusement park, music from an organ grinder, women's skirts swishing around the dance hall, children's laughter echoing from various newfangled rides. That's what this theme park on Boys Blank Island, nicknamed Boblo, near Detroit on the Canadian side of the Detroit River, was to residents alike. Its doors were shut nearly 100 years later in 1993, and the area is now closed to the public. But you can boat or kayak by the remains, listening for the ghostly sounds of long past visitors. While you can't stay here overnight, you can rent these 8 haunted places on Airbnb. Being on an island really adds to the creepiness for me, I think. Like this place, from all the pictures I could find, it really looks totally detached from all other society. Basically meaning that whatever happens here, you are totally by yourself. Like there is a new set of rules for this island. There have been stories that something lurks here, a spirit or something dark. Be very careful if you ever go to Boblo Island. Number 2 on this list is Pripyat Amusement Park. Pripyat is a town that we've talked a lot about on this channel already. In fact, it was recently featured in a video where we looked at the top 5 mysterious towns that are completely abandoned. Pripyat is a ghost town in northern Ukraine near the Ukrainian and Belarus border. It was named after the nearby river Pripyat and was founded in 1970. Right in the town is a small amusement park that once looked quite fun and had plans to grow into a big Ukrainian park that people might flock to. Those dreams were never realized though, and now it sits in complete and utter disarray. Those dreams were never realized because of the horrible accident that occurred in 1986. You see, the town of Pripyat was basically established to serve the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When it was first built, it was a closed town basically only for the workers of this place, but it grew and grew as time went on, and at its height had a population of just under 50,000 people. I don't need to go into too much detail about the accident as a whole, because I imagine that you guys are all pretty aware. But basically, this was the worst accident of this nature in human history, and for all our sakes, we need to hope that it never happens again. The radiation damage was absolutely massive, and right after it happened, the entire town of Pripyat had to be evacuated. That, of course, has left the amusement park, right in the middle of this town, completely abandoned as well. Not a lot of people have gone to this town or park since this incident occurred. For a long time, it wasn't safe to set foot within a set radius of the blast. Those who have been brave or foolish enough to set foot into this town and explore the amusement park have reported some strange and scary findings. Rumor has it that some sort of entity lives there. Something dark and evil calling this abandoned place home. A nasty and sinister entity that doesn't like to be disturbed. There have been talks of this being some type of shadow creature or potentially a beast like a werewolf of sorts. Either way, the people who visit this place feel an overwhelming sense of dread when they're there. They also feel as if they're unwelcome, like they entered somebody's home who doesn't want them there. There are multiple reasons why this amusement park is abandoned, so I'd stay away if I was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is Six Flags. Now, I don't mean Six Flags as a chain or anything like that. There's 23 different Six Flags in the United States and not all of them are haunted. One in particular though is currently out of commission, abandoned, and definitely a spot you shouldn't go to. All the Rooms writes, this Six Flags fell out of business following serious damage from Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The park opened in 2000 and was only operating for a few years before suffering significantly during the hurricane, which displaced 20,000 people and killed nearly 2,000 people. The park closed after Hurricane Katrina and there wasn't enough funding for repairs, so it fell into further decay over the last few years. To this day, there's still an eerie sign at the entrance to the park that says closed for the storm. It's an apocalyptic site which has been taken advantage of by Hollywood and used for films such as Jurassic World and Dawn of Planet of the Apes. These filmmakers are way braver than I would be because I would not want to be setting foot on those grounds. The people who have been here all seem to think that something paranormal is going on. Phantom noises echoing throughout the park and other random bodiless sounds are heard all the time. Similarly to a lot of the other things on this list, there is a massive overhanging feeling of dread. The air is thick with it and you can almost taste the discomfort. No one has reported being attacked here, but it seems like that's only a matter of time if people keep going. The mayor of New Orleans is currently looking at demolishing this park, which, in my opinion, probably for the best.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Ground Church Tower. Take one look at this ominous tower poking out of the water and tell me it's not cursed. Or filled with treasure, and the treasure's cursed. Sure, it's a church, and churches are places of peace and light, but this one has a tragic story behind it. It was once a lovely place of worship located in South Tyrol, Italy. Folks would come and participate in some pretty average church activities. However, in the 50s, major change was on the horizon. The town needed a new source of energy. In the end, they decided that building an artificial lake would be the way to go. They filled a wide expanse with water and ended up flooding the church. I suppose it was cheaper just to leave some of the buildings as they were instead of demolishing them first. The result is stunning and a little bit ominous. These days, you can see the bell tower peeking out from the top of the water. The rest of the church is down below, wallowing in the murky depths. It sort of feels like a water level in a video game with plenty to explore and frustration abound. I mean, imagine descending into the depths and wading through the many waterlogged chambers hidden below. There could be anything waiting down there. Spirits of wildlife that may have been caught up in the artificial lake, the long lingering ghosts of old churchgoers doomed to float about. It's fascinating and fear-inducing. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Sorrento Abandoned Mill, another Italian cursed building. If you ever visit Naples, you can take a day and head off the beaten path. A canyon nearby is known as the Valley of the Mills and houses all sorts of awesome structures. Ages and ages ago, a flour mill was built. For years it operated, providing flour to the surrounding regions. In fact, it apparently managed to do so for hundreds of years. And if you're at all familiar with the operation of mills before standard safety practices were introduced, you know they were death traps. So for hundreds of years, folks toiled away, grinding out flour and occasionally some workers. Uh-oh. Now, these deaths didn't mean that the mill had to close, it was seen as an occupational hazard of sorts. But then, in the late 19th century, it became isolated from the sea. Tasso Square was built, and this caused the mill to become less practical. Humidity rose in the area, and the mill was forced to shut down. Years later, the building was ultimately closed for good. So we've got a historic mill in a valley closed due to societal progress. Sounds like a recipe for ghosts or a curse to me. If you look at it these days, you'll agree. The mill has been totally overtaken by nature. Greenery has consumed the ancient structure, giving it a foreboding and abandoned look. Moss and lichens cover pretty much every square inch of the walls, essentially daring anyone to come and explore. But be careful if you do, it's hard to tell what might be hidden among the foliage. Maybe a mill worker's ghost missing some essential limbs, or a foreman who lost everything when the grindstones stopped grinding. I hope it was worth it. Progress.
Number 3, Danvers State Hospital. Danvers State Hospital, located in Danvers, Massachusetts, has a twisted and haunted history that has managed to capture the imaginations of paranormal enthusiasts and the curiosity of brave urban urban explorers. It's considered one of the most well-known and haunted asylums within the United States. Danvers State Hospital was constructed in 1874 and was originally known as the State Lunatic Hospital at Danvers. It was designed by an architect as a sprawling Kirkbride plan institution. This design was highly preferred in the 19th century due to its focus on natural light and, more importantly, patient comfort. However, over time, the hospital faced issues relating to overcrowding, underfunding, and development surrounding the knowledge and treatment of psychiatric care. Danvers State Hospital became notorious for its mistreatment of patients, overcrowding, and unsanitary conditions. Stories of neglect, harm inflicted by staff, and experimental treatments added to its disturbing reputation. The hospital's history is drowned in tragedy. Thousands of patients passed away within its walls over the years. The hospital's architecture, which features a central administration building with wings extending outward, became an iconic silhouette on the Massachusetts landscape. The hospital's ominous appearance also played a role in its association with paranormal activity. By the mid-1900s, changes in the mental health care and treatment thankfully led to the eventual abolishment of Danvers State Hospital. It officially closed its doors in 1992, causing the property to face years of abandonment and nature-claimed deterioration. Danvers State Hospital's association with the paranormal began to increase dramatically during its years of abandonment. Urban explorers and ghost hunters reported strange interactions and occurrences, including unexplained noises, odd figures, and a general feeling of unease. The hospital's decaying interiors and labyrinth-like layout only further contributed to the sense of doom. In 2005, the administration building was renovated and repurposed into luxury apartments known as the residences at the Page School. However, the other wings of the hospital were demolished to make way for new things. The history and haunting even inspired a 2001 horror film called Session 9, which was set and actually partially filmed on the real hospital ground. Despite the changes to the property and the demolition of much of the hospital, Danvers State Hospital remains a symbol of the troubling history of mental health care in the US. Number 2, Old Changi Hospital, Singapore. The Old Changi Hospital, located in Singapore, is a haunting relic of the past, notorious for its eerie and unsettling history, like many others here. This abandoned medical facility with its dark past and countless paranormal encounters has become the focus of local legends and a location of paranormal fascination. The hospital was built in the early 1930s and was initially used as a military hospital for British forces. During World War II, it witnessed significant trauma and suffering while it was used as a prisoner of war camp by the Japanese. The hospital's history is tainted by atrocities committed during the Japanese occupation. Many prisoners of war, including Allied soldiers and civilians, suffered unspeakable horrors within its thick walls. Claims of torment, brutality, and death all contribute to the building's dark and unsettling presence. After the war, the Old Changi Hospital continued to serve as a medical facility, but its patients began to experience strange displays of paranormal activity. The stories of the paranormal activity soon began to spread throughout the hospital. Visitors and staff often reported hearing strange noises, disembodied voices, and witnessing oddities from another dimension. Commonly reported encounters include sightings of shadowy figures, the sounds of footsteps in empty corridors, and mysterious unexplained events. One of the most well-known stories associated with the hospital is the Lady in Red. According to the legend, a woman dressed in red is often spotted aimlessly roaming through the hospital's hallways. Some believe that she may be the spirit of a nurse from the hospital's past, forever trapped within its walls. Paranormal investigators and enthusiasts have flocked to the Old Changi Hospital to explore its haunted reputation even further, hoping that they may be fortunate enough to catch even just a glimpse of an unknown entity. Many have managed to capture audio recordings, photographs, and video footage supposedly documenting encounters with spirits or unexplained phenomena. These investigators have even further fueled the already blazing fire of this building's haunted reputation. In recent years, the Old Changi Hospital has been featured in various paranormal television shows. The Old Changi Hospital's chilling history and reported encounters with the unexplained make it an enduring and eerie landmark in Singapore. Number 1. Pennhurst State School and Hospital. Pennhurst State School and Hospital, found in Spring City, Pennsylvania, has a sinister history full of allegations surrounding the serious neglect and harmful mistreatment of its residents. This tragic past has given rise to numerous claims of paranormal activity, turning Pennhurst into a hotspot for ghost lovers, paranormal investigators, and curious minds. Pennhurst was established in 1908, initially intended to be an institution for the care and treatment of individuals with neurodivergent brains and serious mental health impairments. Because anyone who is neurodivergent back then then was classified as legally insane. However, over the decades, like many others on this list, the facility became overcrowded, understaffed, and plagued by claims of inhumane treatment towards its patients. Reports of physical and psychological harm, as well as overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, created a lot of controversy and upset in the community. Not enough for them to do anything about it, but in their heads, they were very upset. The mistreatment and neglect of residents at Pennhurst eventually led to its closure in 1987, after over 80 years after the doors first opened. The facility was abandoned and left to be forgotten and taken over by nature, but the stories of the cruel suffering endured by its residents did not fade. Instead, these stories contributed to the now well-known reputation that Pennhurst has. One of the most known paranormal activity hotspots within Pennhurst is the Mayflower Building. This building was once home to some of the institution's most vulnerable residents, who all met grisly, vicious ends. Visitors exploring the abandoned wing have reported hearing looming voices, footsteps, and the sounds of wheelchairs moving on their own. Many believe that the tormented, vengeful spirits of former residents continue to roam the Mayflower Building, unable to find true peace even in death. The Pennhurst State School and Hospital is host to regular ghost tours and paranormal investigations, attracting curious individuals from all over the globe. These tours offer enthusiasts a chance to explore the decaying buildings and the chance to potentially encounter one of the restless spirits that inhabit the grounds. While skeptics argue that the stories of paranormal activity at Pennhurst can be attributed to the tragic history of the institution and the power of suggestion, many who have visited the site claim to have had inexplicable and chilling experiences.
Located at the end of the Mani Peninsula in Greece, you'll find a small landmass called Cape Matapan. The caves in this area open at sea level into a cliff face beneath the headland, the exact point marked by the ruins of a Spartan temple above. The inhabitants built several temples at the site, with the most notable being in dedication to Poseidon and Apollo, for which Strabo in the 1st century AD and Pausanias in the 2nd century AD describe a cult temple that worshipped Poseidon and fronted a cave-like temple on the headland. The cave was believed to be the gateway to Hades, the realm of the dead named for the patron god of the underworld, in which the departed souls were transported across the rivers Styx and or Acheron by Charon the ferryman to be judged on whether they would reside in Elysium or Tartarus. This was one of the several entrances that the ancient Greeks ascribed to Hades, the kingdom of the shades. Others were to be found at the Necromantian of Ephyra, as well as at Alipotropa, another smaller cave network on the Mani. Here, according to the stories, is the place where Orpheus entered the underworld in search of his lost love Eurydice. When the hero Hercules passed down into the underworld, it was again through the Cape Matapan caves. These are not the only legend ascribed to the remote peninsula, however. The Spartans viewed this as a highly significant place of worship, and they built several temples to their gods along the rocky headland. Most prominent amongst the surviving ruins are the remains of a temple dedicated to the sea god Poseidon, located on a hill directly above the cave to Hades. Another story related by Pausanias linked to the picturesque cape relates to the poet Arion, who escaped from pirates to be carried ashore by a pod of dolphins. A bronze statue of the poet riding a dolphin stands on the crest of the cape, not far from the ruins of a temple raised in honor of the sea god Poseidon. The caves at Matapan can still be entered by visitors, although a boat is required to pass through the watery mouth of this particular hellgate. In at number 4 we have Acton Tunichil Muknal Cave in Belize. Uncovered in 1980, the Acton Tunichil Muknal is a mine archaeological site that includes skeletons, ceramics, and stoneware. Acton Tunichil Muknal Cave, otherwise known as the Cave of the Stone Sepulchre, was first entered by the Mayans in AD 300 to 600. It was not until the late AD 700 to 900 that the Mayans went deeper into the cave to perform their ceremonies. The cave is a maze of chambers along with a cathedral-like area for ceremonial sacrifices. In the cave, archaeologists found numerous skeletons, but what makes it even creepier is the fact that most of the skeletons belong to sacrificed people. Many of the remains and artifacts are completely calcified in the cave. Almost all lost their lives to blunt trauma to the head, while most of the pottery found at the site dates from between 700 to 900 AD, which is likely when the bodies found here were sacrificed. One of the cave's most notorious features is the skeleton of a girl whose bones have been calcified into a crystallized appearance. This skeleton is known as the Crystal Maiden. It is unknown what the circumstances of the sacrifices were, though some believe they were to appease the rain god Chak, or possibly the gods of the underworld. Another theory holds that these were believed to be witches, possibly suffering from some kind of mental or physical ailments, and that leaving them unburied in the cave would ensure that their spirits were trapped there. Therefore, from the location to the remains that were found and rituals that were performed here, it's safe to assume that this might just be one of the places that the devil may be hiding.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the New Bedford Orpheum. Abandoned theaters are cursed as a rule. Like, name one abandoned theater that doesn't have a ghost or urban legend attached. Oh wait. They're magnets for drama, it's in their nature. And this Massachusetts-based art house has a flair for the dramatic like no other. Get this, it opened on the same day that the Titanic went down. Talk about a hot start. It operated for a few decades, showing movies and hosting cultural events. The Orpheum was a staple of local culture at the time. However, in 1958, it closed its doors. Not for good, mind you. It would still open on occasion for extra special events and was even used by a tobacco company as storage for a little while. But these days, the Orpheum is still and silent. Ghostly, even. A peek inside will reveal a gigantic, sprawling space, complete with mezzanine, private boxes, and faded murals. The peeling paint and crumbling plaster add to the spooky ambiance. A total lack of audience for ages makes for an echoey good time, too. It's everything an old theater should be, including the creepiness. It's decrepit without being condemnable, which has led the community to rally behind efforts to reopen it. However, none of these have been very successful. It seems like the curse extends out, hitting the folks who would even attempt to resurrect it. Would you take a seat in the audience, or are you scared of seeing an unscheduled show? Coming in at number 2, we've got the Sathorn Unique Building. A monument to what could have been the Sathorn Unique Building is an interesting case. What was supposed to be a luxurious, high-rise apartment building ended up being an abandoned husk. Perfect for urban explorers. Back in the 90s, a magnificent tower was planned. It was to be 47 stories tall with over 600 units housing all sorts of high rollers in Bangkok. Unfortunately, construction had to stop during the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The building itself was about 80% done, but would never be finished in its entirety. Plenty of money, materials, and man-hours were sunk with nothing to show for it. Well, almost nothing. These days, the Sathorn Unique is known as the Ghost Tower. Thrill seekers and graffiti artists love the sprawling building and have pretty much made it their own. The inside is totally filled with spray-painted murals and other forms of street art. Sure, it's dangerous to go running around in abandoned buildings, but try telling that to any of the folks who do it. Aside from the generally unsavory reputation of street art and urban exploring, why is it known as the Ghost Tower? Well, some locals believe the building was built on the site of an ancient graveyard. This unfortunate placement led to construction delays, accidents, and the eventual abandonment. This story is enough to keep anyone but the bravest out of the Ghost Tower. Another theory is that the building cast shadows on the nearby Wat Yat Nawa, an old Buddhist temple. This, while not being worthy of an outright curse, was considered to be unfavorable. Success is hard to achieve while preventing sunlight from reaching Buddhist temples. Recently, the building has achieved some sort of online fame, with many viral videos featuring folks free-running throughout the tower. This resulted in criminal charges being filed against the trespassing videographers. Is that the result of bad luck or a curse? And finally, at number 1, we've got Eastern State Penitentiary. In East Philadelphia, thrown in a cage, ghosts are coming back because they feel the rage. I'll stop there, you get the idea. At one point, this prison was among the most famous worldwide. It jailed some of America's most prolific criminals, including Al Capone, the inspiration for Scarface, and Slick Willie Sutton, the bank robber extraordinaire. Abandoned prisons are absolutely chock full of phantoms and spirits, and why wouldn't they be? The folks there are probably the most discontent and anger-filled of them all. Eastern State takes full advantage of this too. While the prison itself is no longer operational and houses no inmates, well, no living inmates, they still bring fearless folks around on night tours of the facilities. On clear nights, you can even see moonlight shining through these skylights. In addition to the ghosts of prisoners, it's also said that a colony of cats used to live inside the prison. At some point, they were all captured and neutered, leaving them to die off within the walls. An adept eye might just catch the shadow of a ghost cat slinking about in the halls.
Number 5, lipstick warning. Now, Stella McDonald and her now ex-husband used to love exploring abandoned structures when they were together. I remembered one that they described as a shack that was about a mile away from their home. To set the scene, the grass and trees were so grown over and tall that it was hard even getting to said house. Her ex managed to get a window open though, and that's how they got in, because you know, the doors were completely awful. Mildew, you name it. Ugh. I think this is where I interject a warning to not do this yourself, don't do this at home, and if you ever feel the need to urban explore, for the love of everything, please do it safely. So Stella described what they found as a time capsule with piles of expensive furniture and stuff covered with really dusty sheets. Apparently though, everything looked really high quality and expensive. Like even the wallpaper was nice. It was creepy how it seemed like the former residents just walked away from all of it in the 1950s or 60s, and how awful the exterior seemed in comparison. Once again, she called it a shack, not me. So the kitchen was upstairs, which was pretty odd, but you know, the duo ventured up there, and then there's this huge arch opening into like a gentleman's type man cave. Stella made a note that once again, there was a plethora of expensive furniture and who knows what else. So she stood in the archway while her ex rummaged through all of the unknown clutter. Now off to the side of the arch was a huge mirror leaning against the wall. So she used it, she wanted to like check her hair, make sure there was no spider webs in it. Honestly, just the thought of that makes me want to take a shower. No, thank you. Stella took maybe 3 steps away from the mirror to tell her ex that she wanted to leave because it felt like there was a presence right beside her. And when she returned in front of the mirror, she saw that the words "Get out" were suddenly scrawled out in bright pink lipstick that very much hadn't been there before. Now she's sworn on everything that it hadn't been there. She would have noticed it, and also would have noticed if there was another presence in the room with her and her husband. So this shock caused Stella to scream, leap back into a kitchen table, and then obviously, crash, kaboom, fall. So her ex came running over, because, this got his attention, but Stella was too scared to form words by this point. So she just continued to point at the mirror and babble until the duo safely got away. Yeah, hard pass. Also, congrats on him being your ex. Sounds like he cared for you in this moment though. Number 4, death becomes you. So yeah, there was this once beautiful Greek revival home in Uniontown, Alabama, but now apparently it looks like it's being swallowed up by the earth, and its tragic past certainly lives up to the haunting aesthetic. Look folks, the term shack is subjective, and I'm about to stretch that meaning beyond its limit today. So in January of 1994, the remains of, let's see if I can get this right, bleep-year-old Alan Lucy were found buried beneath the front porch of the Hardy Coleman house, or as it's better known, online, the Lucy Murder house. So Alan, who lived in the home with his adoptive parents, Philip and Margaret Lucy, disappeared without a trace in May of 1985. In the months that followed, Jason Lucy, their biological son, told classmates that his father killed Alan and buried him in the backyard. For years, nobody believed Jason's story, even though rumors about the Lucy family swirled around town long before Alan disappeared. Decades after, Alan Lucy's killer was brought to justice, the house has still not recovered, largely due to environmental injustices that have driven many residents out of Uniontown and left those who remain fighting for justice of their own. So what's left? Oh, nothing crazy, just a house in the middle of a forest. Haunted beyond belief. Lots of bad mojo there.
In at number 3, we have the Gates of Guinea in New Orleans. According to voodoo mythology, the newly dead are sent to a kind of purgatory before traveling to meet their ancestors in the deep waters. Known as Guinea, this realm is presided over by the notorious Loire, who goes by the name of Baron Samedi. Often depicted as a skeleton in corpse paint dressed in a top hat and tails, the Baron is a powerful symbol of death and rebirth, guarding the crossroads which form portals to other worlds. The most important of all these portals are the Gates of Guinea themselves. While some followers of voodoo interpret the 7 gates as a spiritual metaphor, others believe them to exist in the physical realm. One of these stories locates the gates in New Orleans. To enter Guinea, it is said that one must open the 7 gates in the correct order. There are tales of voodoo practitioners opening the gates of Guinea to reclaim the souls of the dead. Souls in this lost land are also considered to be at high risk from hoodoo magicians, who have the power to reanimate them as zombies. Although the exact locations of the gates have never been disclosed, there have been oblique suggestions over the years that a clue may lie in the Vervi, or summoning sigil of Baron Samedi himself. Appearing as a crucifix surmounted by 7 stars, the symbol might indeed serve as a map of sorts. Once aligned over the crossroads of Canal Street and Basin Street in the city's French Quarter, the stars of the Vervi seem to fall on notable surrounding cemeteries. Therefore, it's not too uncommon to believe that this might be the spot the devil is hiding, with all the talks of spirits, the Baron and the underworld at this location. In at number 2, we have the 7 Gates of Hell in Pennsylvania. In a quiet little backwater of York, Pennsylvania, one finds Hellam Township, by all accounts a pleasant, friendly town and unremarkable were it not be for the rumoured existence of a gateway to hell in a nearby forest. One of the better known legends tied to the location is that an insane asylum on the town's outskirts, which supposedly burnt to the ground in the 19th century. 7 gates were built surrounding the remains of the asylum. At every gate, with the distance closing in, the police found more of the escaped patients, capturing them peacefully but killing any that showed aggression in violent ways. According to this particular legend, the inmates, most of them criminally insane, escaped, only to be recaptured using a series of tall fences and security gates. Many lost their lives to guards in the process. What the police and citizens didn't realize was that the construction of the gates prevented the souls of the dead from passing on to the other side, forcing them to be trapped for eternity in the remains of the asylum. Legend says the anger, hate and violence in these souls caused a rift that allowed for hell to open, the gates preventing anything to be let out but also preventing anything from traveling in. An alternate story tells of a doctor who once lived in the town. This man, by some accounts a Satanist, was said to have designed a series of strange gates on this land, which followed a winding path running deeper and deeper into the forest, where stories agree is that those who pass through the gates in order will find themselves transported straight to the underworld. Only the first gate is visible by daylight, situated in woodland just off Helm's Trout Run Road. Regardless of what the origin of the gates are, if you were to take a trip to the gates, you'll only find one. The rest of the gates can only be seen during the night. They exist in a realm between light and dark and can only be accessed at that time. If you were to find and pass through all 7 gates, you'll find yourself in hell, unable to escape and trapped for all of eternity. Those who have tried to look for the gates report seeing shadow figures wandering through the forest, the smell of something burning, and screams in the distance. Worst of all, some say they know of a few who have found at least 5 gates, but went off looking for the 6th, they never returned. And finally, in another one, we have Pluto's Gate in Turkey. Known as Pluto's Gate or Plutonian in Greek, the archaeological site in southwestern Turkey was discovered in 2013 after following the route of a thermal spring. The site matches closely the description of the temple to the underworld that disappeared in the 6th century. The most notable feature of this gate is that deadly vapor still is blown out of the gate. Additionally, this location was once used in ancient rituals to the gods of the underworld and still claims the lives of unfortunate birds who get too close. An archaeological dig revealed the remains of an ancient temple situated on a thermal spring, long believed to have been a gateway to hell. This well-documented temple of Pluto disappeared from record sometime around the 6th century. Amongst the distinguishing features of this particular gate are the toxic fumes that waft out from the tunnels beneath. In times of antiquity, these were often inhaled by the priests of Pluto, promptly sending them into hallucinogenic trance states. Writing at some time around the year 0 AD, the Greek philosopher Strabo claimed that any animal that passes inside meets instant death. Even now, the poisonous vapors claim the lives of birds that fly or nest too close to the ruins. Only the eunuchs of Cybele, an ancient fertility goddess, were able to enter the Hellgate without any apparent damage, the report said. With the mysterious deadly vapor and ancient rituals, the gods being transformed at this location, it's not hard to believe that the devil may just be lurking deep within the temple.